remotely. We have a number of people joining us remotely today for a meeting of the AFA Committee. As we've done over the past several meetings, we're going to quickly dispense with committee introductions. Then some members will be going to remote rooms. And then I'm hoping we're going to start our agenda right around 10:15. So why don't we start with introductions? Let's start with the inner horseshoe with Representative Martin.
John Martin, House District 151, Northwestern Aroostook County, and I live in Eagle Lake.
Hello, Teresa Peirce, House District 44, the majority of Falmouth.
Hello, my name is Eric Jorgensen. I represent part of Portland, District 41. Thank you.
Representative Millett.
Good morning. I'm Soen Millett. I represent House District 71, including the citizens of Norway, Sweden, Waterford, and West Paris.
Good morning, Linda Sanborn. I represent Senate District 30, which is Gorham, Scarborough, and Buxton.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Dunphy. I represent House District 122, which is Old Town and the Indian Island Voting District.
Good morning. I'm Dennis Keshel from Belgrade. I represent House District 76, Belgrade, Fayette, Rome, Vienna, and Maine.
We have a number of members also joining remotely. Representative Hubble, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. Good to see everybody. Brian Hubble, House District 135, Bar Harbor, Mount Stewart, Lemoyne.
Representative Arata.
Good morning. My name is Amy Arata, and I represent District 65, which includes New Gloucester and part of Poland.
And Representative Wadsworth.
Good morning. Nathan Wadsworth here, House District 70, Freiburg and surrounding towns.
Madam Co-Chair.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Breen. I represent several communities in Cumberland County. I serve as Senate Chair of Appropriations, and today is the turn of my House Co-Chair to be our Zoom host. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel such pressure and responsibility. I'm State Representative Drew Gattine. I'm the House Chair of the committee. I represent part of the city of Westbrook. Again, so now we're going to take a couple minutes, let people get to the remote rooms they're going to be working from. And again, I'm hoping we're going to start in just a few minutes. Thank you very much. We'll get started in 1 minute. We're just waiting for one more of the committee members to get logged on. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Thanks, everybody. A couple housekeeping things. I know we've done this a bunch of times already, but we seem to have some really good video quality right now. But you know, if the connection seems to disintegrate over time, I may ask some members to turn their video off, or I may turn the video off for them, especially if we're not at a point where they're asking or responding to questions. So let me just quickly run through the agenda. The first thing that we're going to do this morning is we're going to hear from the two chairs of the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee. We're going to hear from Lori LaChance and Josh Broder. They're going to talk to us about the committee's report and also answer some questions that the committee members might have. Then we've also invited the administration, and we're going to have Commissioner Figueroa with us today to talk about the status of implementation and what the administration's plans are with respect to implementing some of the specific recommendations within the ERC's report. That should take us most of the morning. At noon, we're scheduled to have Mr. Glessner from the Judiciary Branch come and talk about the impact of the pandemic on the judicial system, what their anticipated funding needs are, including possible uses of coronavirus relief fund dollars. And then at 12:30, we are going to hear from Chris Nolan, who's going to go over the closing transactions. As we all know, we closed the fiscal year at the end of June. Reserve balances and general fund status. Again, I believe Commissioner Figueroa is also going to be here and available to answer any questions we might have of the administration around that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. LaChance and Mr. Broder to talk to us about all the work that the ERC did. And I want to thank you both for joining us today and making yourself available. And I'll thank you in advance for all the work that the ERC did. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Senator Breen, Representative Gatine, and the honorable members of the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee. My name is Lori LaChance. I'm the president of Thomas College, and my co-chair is Josh Broder, the CEO of Tilson Technology Company, which I'll let him explain a little more of later. But we are really honored to be with you today, and very honored to have been given this opportunity to do something for our state in an hour of great need. What we thought we'd do today is we have some very brief remarks that we'll share with you, and then we'll really open it up to Q&A to answer all those questions that you may have. We've structured our remarks to be very brief, but I will start by giving you a little background on who the ERC is, who's on it, how we're structured. Josh will then take it and talk about our actual work and what we recommended to put before you and the governor and all across this state who are working on economic recovery. And then I'll end with what are the next steps and how do we pivot in our process to the longer term. And then we'll just open it up to Q&A. I just want to start by saying many of you I've worked with over the years, but my career now spans close to 40 years. The first 30 were spent just focusing on analyzing and forecasting Maine's economy. And I must say, in all those years, I've never seen a situation quite as challenging as the one we're in right now. It touches every aspect of life in Maine. It touches every aspect of our ability to sustain and grow our economy. And the urgency with which our committee took its work was focused on this understanding that the work before us is very important. It covers many areas and will need all of our collective best thoughts on how we go forward. I frequently describe the economy, the modern economy of Maine, and certainly our future, to be operating in a global, knowledge-based, technology-driven economy. And we have tried to, as a group, as we look at our short-term immediate needs, to consider that we need to try to work towards a longer term that shows an economy that is changing, and to position Maine as best we can in the short run for those longer term challenges that we're going to need to meet. So just to talk a little bit about who the ERC is and what we do, the Economic Recovery Committee was developed in early May. We had our first meeting on May 6th. And then over the successive 8 weeks' time, the committee worked feverishly to put forth our first formal report on July 15th. Our mandate, our challenge, if you will, was to focus on the long-term economic recovery of this state and to bridge the gap between all of the effort in the reopening of our economy, to bridge it in such a way that would position the economy to begin a strong recovery and get us back on track for the 10-year economic development strategy that had been worked on by thousands of Mainers and had put forth a plan for the future for us. And our work was really to be bookended by those two things, to make sure that we were preparing the economy with the appropriate investments at the appropriate time to pick up where the reopening occurred and get folks safely across that bridge and back on track towards that future and that vision that we're all seeking. The ERC itself has 45 members. 37 of them were appointed by the governor, and then 8 of them have to do with, 4 of them are legislators who came from the various caucuses, including Senator Kimes, Senator Carpenter, Representative Hubble, and Representative Morris. And we also had 4 folks who represented our congressional delegation. The mix itself was an amazing group of people with tremendous talents, a tremendous diversity of experience, a diversity of opinion, diversity of approach, and geographic diversity of all ways to try to work together. And that the fact that people came from all different walks of life, if you will, in Maine and in many different areas made the committee stronger. And I just have to first and foremost say thank you for the 4 members who served in the legislature. They've been a central part of this decision making. And for the committee itself, it was amazing in a very brief period of time how our committee, they all stepped up and came to consensus on what our state needed. And if there's one thing that every single person shared, it is a tremendous passion for the state of Maine and a love for the state, and really honored to be able to come together and do something in the time of greatest needs. We quickly realized that a committee of 45 was not going to be able to do the type of work at the speed that we needed it to as a committee of the whole. So immediately we separated the committee into 6 subcommittees assigned to different sectors of the economy. The 6 subcommittees were education and workforce, healthcare, nonprofits, childcare and support services, hospitality, retail and tourism, innovation, infrastructure, and manufacturing and natural resources. Each subcommittee had a very strong chair and a group of committee members assigned to it. And Josh and I really empowered those subcommittees to do the hard work. And they are the architects of the recommendations that will be put before you today. Those subcommittees met a total of 70 times or more. to get their work done. They took their work very seriously. All of those meetings were public. They had speakers who addressed the various subcommittees, and of course, a lot of written input and recommendations from experts in the fields. And we're very proud of the work that they were able to coalesce and focus and prioritize their recommendations in such a way that we could send forward a document that was just not a laundry list, but one that was prioritized with attention to priority order, order of magnitude, importance, and the various aspects that would give you something to respond to. Our job, we know we are just an advisory body and we're here to serve. And we took that very seriously. We wanted to give you the very best ideas that we could come up with on the very best steps to take and the urgency with which to take those steps. But we hand it off to the governor, to the legislature, and to those who will be charged with implementing. Happy to share wisdom with any one of those, but understand that our job was simply to advise. And so we humbly offer these recommendations for your consideration. I think at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Josh to tell you about our recommendations themselves.
Thanks, Lori, and thank you to Senator Breen and Representative Katine and the honorable members of the Appropriations Committee. I'm Joshua Broder, co-chair of Maine's Economic Recovery Committee, along with Lori. And in my day job, I'm the CEO of Tilson, a Maine headquartered company with around 600 employees. And we're on a mission to build America's information infrastructure nationwide. I also sit on the boards of several Maine organizations, including Skowhegan Savings Bank, Kleinschmidt Associates, a water resource engineering firm in Portland, and New England Marine Monitoring, a fisheries technology company owned by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, also in Portland. I want to start by picking up where Lori left off on what did the Economic Recovery Committee find. From the outset, the Economic Recovery Committee was confronted with issues out of our control and beyond our purview. And an example of this was that there were similar recovery committees going on with processes in other states, and that created comparable frameworks and benchmarks that were present in our discussion from the outside. Example of some of the things those committees took up that were not within our purview was that there were public health decisions on travel and quarantine that affected health decisions and really were not focused on building the public health response that we had here in Maine. And we realized very quickly that those sort of restart activities were not in alignment with the charge given to us by the governor. Nevertheless, it quickly became clear to us that we couldn't focus on our long-term recovery planning until we addressed the crisis that was unfolding in front of us in real time. And it became clear during our work that a stable economy, any kind of recovery, is predicated on a robust public health response that creates stability for Maine's people. A safe economy is a stable and viable one, as other states who have not curbed the virus to the extent we have here in Maine have quickly found out. The pandemic is very much raging actively now in our country, and the ongoing investment in controlling it in Maine is the foundation for any economic recovery. It also became clear to us that Maine did not have enough immediate funds from any source to stabilize Maine's employers, and that more federal stimulus is urgently needed, particularly given the cliffs that will occur once the first round of stimulus programs end with PPP and enhanced unemployment. And in our report, we reiterate the call to our federal representatives to bring more stimulus and support to the areas that we've highlighted. Most importantly, we found that the economic disruption was both widespread and disproportionate in its impacts on various groups, and that the pandemic had exacerbated inequalities in our economy based on wage and race, which left already vulnerable populations unprotected from catastrophic conditions. And something that really struck me in our work was that the Boston Fed, when they came to talk to us, essentially said the groups that have been most impacted, the parts of the economy that are hurting the most, were ones that already had structural difficulties and had sort of unequal benefit during the previous period of sustained economic growth. Our work unfolded across a very short time scale. Even during those few weeks that we were in session, the pandemic and its economic impacts continued to evolve in real time, which impacted our recommendations as they unfolded. Some recommendations we considered in the beginning were obsolete or irrelevant by the time we got to the end of our process. And as policymakers, I'd encourage you to view our report as a picture in time and to continue to evaluate the evolving situation in front of us as you consider its recommendations to put them into the appropriate context of the time that they were made. I'd like to point you to page 10 of our July 15th report, which I believe has been provided to you as a read ahead. And I'll just provide a brief summary overview of our recommendations of investment levels, but during the question and answer, I'd be, and I'm sure Lori would also be happy to discuss any line items that you may have an interest in. We had three main categories: supporting Maine people, where we recommended $497 million of supports; stabilize Maine employers, where we recommended $430 million of supports; and investing in Maine infrastructure, where we recommended $165 million of supports. And to put those in context, these are the recommendations that we made specifically for this support and sustain phase of dealing with the emergency that was right in front of us. And so that takes us to the question of why would the ERC recommend these specific funding amounts? Given our charge to develop specific policy recommendations, the general urgency of the situation, and the detailed input we received from various sectors, we identified specific dollar amounts to provide an order of magnitude for our recommendations to offer a framework for quick decision making. The ERC was not specifically charged with assigning figures, and it was our opinion as co-chairs that we should, in order to offer the most detailed support we could to the governor and the legislature to understand the priorities and make decisions. Ultimately, we are in a period of tough choices, and our aim was to provide better decision support by assigning relative values. While the funding for the Coronavirus Relief Fund of the CARES Act helped frame our discussion about these recommendations, we were obviously well aware of that fund and what was unfolding as we made these recommendations. I want to make it clear that the ERC from the beginning that we understood that the CRF was not sufficient to meet all of the needs outlined in our report or all of the needs on an absolute basis. And so I wouldn't view it as a document on how to spend those CRF funds. That was never our goal, nor was it in our purview to specifically give direction on CRF. What the ERC did want to do was to convey a plan that had some direction, magnitude, and some reasons behind those recommendations, and the need to take urgent action to help Maine at some level is source agnostic. So whether the funding for these ideas comes from the CRF or a bond issue, which we also recommended, or further federal stimulus, I just want to underscore the urgency of those needs. On the topic of bonding, our report specifically calls out a $100 million connections bond, which largely supports transportation at $85 million and further broadband investment at 15. While our bond funding ideas are largely about investing in recovery, we thought it should be a feature of this report as opposed to just a feature of our next planning phase, because we understand that the legislature would need to take these up quickly for something to land on the ballot in November, and the sort of timescale of bond funds operates slower than federal supports, which may be in hand or shortly in the future be in hand. And we had a good discussion at the ERC, and we received a lot of external comments that a bond that includes transportation, broadband, worker training and retraining, and worker attraction, and other investments in marketing Maine as a safe place to live, work, and recreate, among other economic supports and recovery investments, would be critical to our future success with federal stimulus when it emerges, on having our priorities clear and matching funds in hand, as well as the means to take action at the state level if federal government fails to act in this next phase in a timely way. The ERC stands ready to help any lawmaker with anything they need to process these recommendations and include the rationale behind them. And we'd be happy to work with the legislature on the ERC recommendations on ways to implement them if desired. Getting back to what the Boston Fed said about structural inequities exacerbated by the pandemic, one real challenge we had was that people were really hurting in Maine, and in most cases that impacted lower wage workers and minority groups. And unusually in a group of recommendations from an economic recovery committee or any economic development oriented committee, we had several call outs for health and human services kinds of supports. And we offered specific guidance in our narrative that we hoped would be instructive to implementers around making sure those supports made it to those who are so unequally impacted. So with that view of sort of where we've been, I'd like to hand it off back to Lori to talk about what happens next at the ERC.
So in a nutshell, at the onset, we had two distinct dates we were heading towards in our work. Our July 15th report was to examine in the immediate term, how do we put forth a set of recommendations and investments that could help to stabilize the economy and support our people through this at this exact point in time. We're now supposed to turn our eyes to the longer term. And by December 1, we have another report due that is really faced on how do we act on sustaining our economy and growing it in a number of ways with longer term investments to get us back aligned with the 10-year economic development strategy. In the immediate term, we did give our folks a week and a half off to have a little vacation, but we will resume meeting on July 31st, and we will have a 2-hour meeting to clean up, if you will. There were 12 more recommendations that came out of the subcommittees that didn't find their way into our July 15th report. So we're going to do a deep dive on those to understand, do they live on and get taken to the next phase? Because some of them are longer term in nature, or do they get sent to the appropriate Department of State Government to be acted upon? How will we take care of those? So July 31st will kind of give the formal end to our stabilize and support work, and we'll hand the baton off to all who will make actually the implementation choices. And then we're going to turn our attention, starting in early August, to turn to the sustain and grow in a very major way. Now, by sustain and grow, we're talking about lifting our eyes to true recovery. What will it take? And if you look at the recommendations, there are 7 of them in the economic development strategy for the state of Maine, the 10-year plan, if you will. But they fall into 3 broad areas. One is the development of talent and the attraction of talent. That's the people aspect for the long run. The second is in the area of innovation, as that's the way we will add value to our economic future. And the third is the infrastructure that it will take to service that new economy and help us to be as prosperous as we can and to move as rapidly towards our vision as possible. Recognizing in a modern economy that the infrastructure of the future varies a bit from the infrastructure of the past. So when we talk about infrastructure, we're also talking, in addition to the critically important roads and bridges and ports and airports and all those things of traditional infrastructure, I would also suggest that education is the infrastructure of the future, as is broadband connectivity. And that's why you're already seeing those themes emerging in our work. And certainly there'll be much more focus on that going forward. So you could imagine that our work will turn to talent development, obviously deep discussions of the inequities and how we could help resolve those going forward, innovation and infrastructure. Our next big report is due December 1st. However, as we did with this first report, as issues and ideas emerge and we have recommendations that are fully fleshed out enough to send on, we will happily do interim reports because there's no need to wait, and there will be urgency in a different level over the next several months. with that, we would welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. LaChance. Thank you, Mr. Broder, for that overview. That was really, really helpful. So I'm going to turn it over to members of the committee for any questions. I see Representative Jorgensen with his hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciated this report. It's I think, really exciting to see. I love the fact that you're really thinking about this in the sense of like a fundamental disruption to an economy that is itself in the process of transition. I mean, it really is a crazy time, and I'm really glad you're looking at it in the way you are. The question I have is, I just wanted to know a little bit about if there's been any thought to the development of the guidelines for the particular, say, business supports, nonprofit supports, other types of grant-making activity that's going to happen, and sort of how that's going to go. It seems to me time is really of the essence there, and I assume there's some kind of a parallel track where that's being figured out, but I'd love to know if there's any updates on that.
Yeah, maybe I'll take the first stab at that. I sort of echo your sense of urgency about time being of the essence, particularly for small businesses here in Maine. We did, in fact, give some thought to the broad brushstrokes of how a program may be implemented, but we recognize that we really didn't have implementation in our charge, and there are, in fact, professionals in the line agencies that have a lot of expertise in this area. And so we provided some of our thoughts to DECD on the implementation of that specific program, but they were very high level in nature. And ultimately, we were quite deferential to how they might view implementing sort of the objective at the funding levels we had recommended.
I would also add that what we recognized in this urgent time period was we encouraged DECD to use the infrastructure that is currently in place rather than trying to create a whole new program with whole new staffing and rules and regulations. And Josh can say it better than I, but we wanted to err on the side of getting the dollars in the hands of employers as soon as possible. Recognizing it won't be perfect, there may be a few mistakes made, but time is such of the essence right now. We can't wait for structures to be put in place because another month or two is just simply too long for this part of our process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Peirce.
Thank you. I have a question around the higher education section and the 75 million divided between public and private. And I wondered, do you anticipate this all just being for reopening, and how you sort of envision that breakdown to come about? Is it based on your focus on low-income families that are struggling more at this time, and education provides such a great step forward in so many ways? And how do you think about the community colleges, and was that in this section as well?
Yes, the Education Committee utilized the direct work of 38 institutions of higher ed. The 38 institutions have been working very closely since this pandemic started. We're not in competition with each other. We've been very, very collaborative in working both across the public and the private institutions, and the for-profit institutions have joined us in this. It includes everybody, community colleges, university system, everyone. We came forward with a set of principles for reopening our colleges, or not really reopening, but bringing people back to campus for that face-to-face learning where the vast majority of us thrive. We collectively serve Maine students, and there are some institutions, obviously, that draw from out of state, but there are many of the private institutions, for example, like ours, with a very low endowment, that serve 80% of our students come from Maine, 80 to 85% stay and work in Maine, and fully 2/3 are first generation. So we all share that, but we come from different perspectives. The 75 million is an estimate of the additional costs for our higher eds to be able to do everything possible on the campuses to return to that face-to-face learning, which is the most powerful form of learning, particularly for a typical Maine student, maybe from a rural area or first gen like I was, to have that high touch, high personal approach to education. And all of us were committed to doing everything we could to safely return to that offering. So the 75 million was a first pass because the higher eds had to do it right now. We couldn't wait. We had to invest the funds regardless of whether we had them or not. It had to be done. And that covers everything from de-densifying the classrooms. So you have to add extra sections, putting the PPE for everybody, students, faculty, staff, everybody, the engineering that had to go on the campuses, all the myriad of costs with additional testing regimens to ensure that we don't have an outbreak on any campus that would cause us to flood the local hospital. Like, for example, Colby and Thomas are working very closely because if either or both of us, God forbid, had an outbreak on our campus, our local hospitals would immediately, we would absorb any capacity and then some. So did I answer your question? That's what it covers.
Yeah, I think to a degree, and I appreciate I think language is important around, you're not reopening, you've been open. It's just about bringing people back to campuses. I think, I know you're not talking about implementation at all, but this isn't really like the department. I mean, how do you see access to these funds coming about?
Well, the way different federal funds have come has been on, it could be on a per pupil basis. It could be on a per Maine pupil basis. That might be the best way to do it, to ensure that every Maine student has the opportunity to safely come back to in-person learning.
Thank you.
So in the queue, I've got Representative Dunphy, then Representative Hubble. If other people have questions, there are multiple ways to get my attention, but I'm scanning the room. I'm scanning people raising their hand on video, and there's chat, and there's a raise hand function. Representative Cashel, I see you, and also I see Representative Millett. So Representative Dunphy, you're next.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for being here, Chairs LaChance and Broder. I appreciate the work that you've done on the committee and listened to many of the sessions. And I want to thank you for that. My question has to do with agriculture in Maine. And, I guess, you can argue that agriculture is the foundation for so many aspects that are in your report, such as public health, economic recovery, food insecurity. And given what we've seen nationally with the fragility of like food distribution and big ag, I was wondering what the conversation was or how it was woven into the economic recovery plan that we, stabilize and support Maine farms and agriculture.
That's an excellent question. We had a subcommittee that included agriculture, and when Governor Mills convened us in our sort of opening conversation, she specifically said, make sure you think about agriculture, and in particular, how we add value to that agriculture here in Maine and provide the necessary infrastructure supports for agriculture. And so as we got into the planning and the stabilize and support phase, we recognized that it was very difficult to differentiate between the urgency in financial need for specific small businesses. I would view, certainly not all, but many agricultural providers in Maine would be categorized as small businesses under sort of any kind of implementation guidelines. And we felt that the recommendation for business supports would provide immediate relief for agriculture in this short-term planning frame. I think as we move forward into building a bridge back to the 10-year plan, which is really the meat of the Economic Recovery Committee's work coming into this next several months, one of the areas we're looking at is workforce. Another will be infrastructure, and another will be innovations. And I think those three things cut across agriculture. ultimately you think about how food systems are working and how people can even go to the grocery store, or certainly the just horrific disruption that food providers have had by losing their institutional customers, and just having, sort of more retail demand. All of that will require transformation and will require some supports. We did recommend generally $50 million of innovation and transformation support for Maine small businesses, which we assumed would include agriculture as a major player. And those were divided into support from FAME for specific financing vehicles, and also additional support for the Maine Technology Institute's Maine Technology Asset Fund, which could also support innovation and transformation in agriculture and other industries. What is interesting about funding those things now through various funds is that those funds all come with different hooks and requirements. And so to the extent that the funds that make their way into FAME and MTI's programs, to the extent those can be less restrictive and provide more sort of context sensitive investments as those agricultural and other businesses transform, I think that'll be a really important implementation consideration.
Yeah, agriculture is such a foundational industry of Maine's. We have a 200-year history with this, and our economy has been built on that. And those are going to be one of the foundational pieces, along with wood fiber and the fisheries, that we have the greatest opportunity to innovate around those, because we have centuries of experience in that area. So as Josh has recommended, as we spread some supports around to increase the innovative capacity across those industries, those will be the building blocks of the future for Maine. And I think where we would deploy our talent to, it'll be really, really important. I think we've grown to realize in this pandemic just how central they are to our very existence and our ability to thrive going forward.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you mention forestry too. That's also a key piece in agriculture.
Representative Hubble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to thank the chairs. As a member of the ERC, it was an extraordinary experience so far, and I appreciate that we're nowhere near done yet. But it was as everyone understands, a large and diverse group of people who came together, I think, demonstrating extraordinarily good faith on an incredibly short time frame to make hard decisions. And I just want to say from up close, I really appreciated the process all the way through, and I think that's a credit to both the chairs. One of the things that I think it took the ERC members a while to come to grips with was how the committee's recommendations would fit into the larger frame decisions, which ultimately, of course, were headed towards the governor's desk and could have some could depend one way or another on legislative action. So in that process, we spent quite a bit of time working essentially within the bounds of the CARES framework, but the recommendations did come up, as you know, with I think recognizing the opportunity perhaps of a special legislative session for the implementation of a bond package as a way to fairly quickly raise some capital. I think with the prospect that if the legislature were to return to special session in August and put something before the voters in November, it could actually have a really essential impact on the current crisis. The specific recommendation in the report grew out of the infrastructure working group recommendation in relation to broadband, which universally I think has support and recognition for the importance of it, and transportation. There were other discussions from other subgroups about a broader sort of package of workforce initiatives as you said, in relation to providing infrastructure for attracting talent, education, a broader series. I think the chairs know where I'm headed with this right now. But I would love to have a little broader discussion, just from the chair's point of view, of what, irrespective of the time frame, you think would be most effective recommendation specifically to the legislature right away, so what a good package would be in relation to those proposals.
Maybe I'll start just by saying I heard similar conversations throughout the subcommittees and in the general committee as a whole around the use of bond funds for some of the specific recommendations that we were coming up with. I mean, one thing that I think was looming large for everyone was that the cost of money is at a historic low. And we may be entering a period where not only do we have the cost of money at a historic low, but because of the magnitude of the stimulus, we may be facing further inflation, which will cause that debt to become cheaper. My view was that many of our recommendations, while we had the CARES Act sort of in our peripheral vision, really could and should be considered from a variety of potential funding sources. And the idea of bond funds that could be voted on in November that could put us in a position to be able to act to capture our fair share or more than our fair share as a state of federal stimulus is really important. I started my business career just in time to land in the recession that began in 2008, and really saw the power of the ARRA sort of stimulus period that kicked off in 2009, 10, 11, 12. And Maine didn't fare very well in capturing our fair share during that period, largely for lack of matching funds. And so my view would be that the recommendations we made, particularly around workforce retraining, innovation, investment, attraction of workforce and people who view Maine as a safe and quality place to live, are all really important things that we should think about funding regardless of the availability of federal funds. And keep in mind, on a tactical basis, if there are federal funds available, our willingness to do some modest investments in those areas could bring considerable federal leverage. So we won't know in this session, unfortunately, how that's going to unfold. But I think taking a more proactive approach to secure funding in those areas will give us the tools we need collectively to either go it alone on some of those issues or bring in more federal leverage on investment as stimulus unfolds, and not just this immediate tranche in front of us, but after the election and in the future as what's going to be a really difficult recession grinds on.
Yeah, we agree. I agree totally with Josh that the committee really struggled because when you talk about bonds, they're a little bit of a longer term process, but we brought it before you because if Maine is to take charge of its own destiny, we can't just wait and hope that the federal government will not only give us the right amount, but in the right time and with the freedom to use it for the things that we want for our future. And we thought by at least putting forward some of these ideas and the idea of a bond and doing it now instead of waiting would at least give you the opportunity, if you chose to grab that baton and take advantage of that, it would give you more flexibility to do it earlier and get the process started, knowing it's a fairly long process. So it was really recognized by all that it would probably be necessary if we want to really take charge of our own future. It would be an important tool in that toolkit.
That answer your question, Representative Hubble?
Yes, thank you very much. Look forward to further discussion along those lines.
Thank you. Representative Millet, I've got you next, then Representative Keschel.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Laurie and Josh, for the report and the work that you've done in the short period of time that you've been tasked with advising the governor. I'm particularly interested in trying to get a sense of how you feel the audiences that have now had your report for a little over a week and the activity still pending in Washington and the areas that you address that other groups, including some of the governors, already made commitments on the CARES money, get reprioritized, and how we acknowledge that your work, similar to the work of this committee, has had the benefit of feedback from the areas of the economy that have been most immediately impacted, both from an internal point of view and from the private and nonprofit economy as well. So I guess my first thought is, I believe your audience is primarily the administration through the governor. We represent another audience, obviously the full legislature does, and many of the sectors of the economy that you've addressed and attempted to focus on are always out there looking and waiting to see what kind of assistance might be coming in their direction. So I guess my questions would fall in three different categories. The process that you used and the benefit of those 4 legislators who are current, and I think I counted 3 former legislators, many people who've been involved in the process, a former DAFS commissioner, your staff member from the administration, clearly have the hands-on experience in looking at the general fund and the transportation or highway fund budgets. How did you arrive at consensus, and how did you approach the prioritization and focus process that you speak to? Was it unanimity? Did you have areas where there was strong division? And could you share with us some of the approaches you took to try to make sure that you considered all of the elements of impact by the COVID virus and the pandemic that followed? And is your assignment, which I think, Laura, you said would end on the support and stabilization early stages at the end of this month, which would be the end of this week, to reprioritize what you and your 45 colleagues have all said a week and a half ago represents the best snapshot of where you see us going. So process, reprioritization, and the speculation that would be my third category, and I'm not going to just throw those numbers out here because I know you're well aware of them. You focused on $1 billion, 92 million, 100 million of it being bonds. We are told that the available money on the CRF funds is now 1.252 billion. And we know that the governor has already made commitments and has listed for us expenditures and encumbrances would push $1 billion. And we're also aware of the fact that the governor has recommended to the congressional delegation the needs for upwards of, or if not more than, 3 trillion. So that the last part is, in addition to process and reprioritizing, do you acknowledge that this is a moving target and that someone, some group, whether it be you in your remaining time or the legislature as a whole, will have to take a wholly new look at commitments already made and commitments yet to be verbalized to anyone in a real forceful way? Again, I'm not trying to ask you to go on at great length. I appreciate your work. I'm interested in the words that you used, Lori: focus and prioritize. Having been around here for a while, you know that this is not something that we in the legislative branch do very often and very scientifically. And any help you can give us there in terms of how you approached it, what reprioritizing approach you might think best would work for us. Thank you.
I'd like to answer one of those questions from the middle of the stack, and then I think Lori would be the most eloquent in talking about how we went about trying to build consensus across 45 really different people with different perspectives on such complicated topics. But on the question of what do we plan to reprioritize based on the fact that the needs are a moving target, and that the means are a moving target. The very direct answer to that is no, we do not plan to do that. But we recognize that the recommendations we made were within the limited context of the frame of our understanding of available resources and what the needs were. And that's been a constantly shifting picture as the pandemic and its economic impacts unfolds. And so when we took on this very urgent mission to try and make recommendations around supporting and sustaining an economy in free fall, we recognized that ultimately our real and longer term mission was to plan around economic recovery and how to get back to being on track for our 10-year economic strategy. And I think for us, that challenging balance around dealing with the fire in front of us and having a little bit of critical distance to think about our economic recovery is a bit of a gift that the governor gave us when she said, look, we're all going to run to the ball to deal with this emergency. And while that's happening, we're going to be planning for the future and not be caught flat-footed at such a time that the emergency was under control and we were back into more deliberate economic development planning. And so really the focus of our move going forward, with the exception of, sort of final adjudication of some of the ideas that didn't quite from a timeliness standpoint make it into the final report, we'll be sort of reframing our conversation about those longer term, more targeted investments. And we recognize that, to your point, reprioritization of what's been recommended is an inevitability and needed and a hard job. But we believe we were sort of pushing the bounds of our scope and charge in the support and sustain period anyway. And we really need to get towards the hard work of saying, what does Maine need to be doing on a 2, 3, 5 year planning horizon as we make targeted investments that will have the biggest impact on getting on track back to that 10-year plan. I would also add that in addition to the excellent legislative member engagement that we also had members of the delegation. And when you talk about audiences for our report, absolutely the executive, absolutely the legislative here in Maine, but very much so trying to inform the alignment that our delegation would be pushing for with our economic priorities, as opposed to those more broadly in the nation. And we did have very good engagement with them in the process, and we hope that the message of our report and the work that we did will carry through to their efforts to advocate for Maine on a bipartisan basis for whatever is next to come. But I think Lori would be in a great position to talk about sort of our process and consensus building, which was, a huge challenge that we did have some structural ideas to kind of tackle.
So yeah, thank you, Sawin, for asking that question. It's been a fascinating case study as someone who has seen many, many commissions and the resulting work and the difficulty that you can have in coming to consensus. I'd say it's nothing short of a miracle that we're able to do this. And we need miracles in these times. But we had these 45 diverse people. There were times where conversations were tense. And one of the things I was most proud of is they were tense in a highly respectful manner, recognizing that every single person was coming together with one common goal, helping the state we love to survive what's going on so that we can thrive. And I think it was that common sense of that common vision of what we were about here that caused people to express their opinion, sometimes loudly, with great passion and concern, but at the end of the day, realizing we can't do everything. And if we try to do everything to the fullest extent right now, we will fail at our task, which is to try to stabilize things and make our very best recommendations for that so that we can actually live to fight another day as an economy and move forward. And with that hanging over our head and that deadline of July 15th, that was just short from day one and got shorter with every second that passed, we came together in a way of respect that gave these recommendations that you see on page 10. And when it came time, we empowered the subcommittees to do their work. We empowered and encouraged them to bring forth their recommendations. They started by bringing them all forward. Then we pushed them back and said, please give us your top priorities. If we give 20 priorities, then nothing's a priority. You know, how are we going to really put something that's not just meaningful forward, but will be helpful? It won't be helpful if we give them too many priorities. And the committees did the hard work of narrowing their priorities. And what was interesting is all 6 committees agreed on many of these things. They all said, oh my gosh, we got to reopen childcare in our schools so that our children will be taken care of and our workers can get back to work. And the other thing that was just unanimous was we've got to do something to help employers right now. We can't wait. We can't wait any longer. We can't fight over it. We can't, you know, play any politics on this. We have to do something. So as you see these all recommendations across the committees, which did the hard work, the subcommittees, to narrow down and to prioritize. Narrow and prioritize. We kept sending it back until they did that, and they did it so well. Then as we stood back as co-chairs and looked at it, they fell into these 3 broad categories: supporting Maine people, foundational. Number 1, supporting Maine people, stabilizing Maine employers, and investing in infrastructure. So I want to say through this multi-voting process that we use to get consensus and order of magnitude, the 3 big buckets are laid out in priority order. You have to support Maine's people before we can start regrowing our economy. So that was first, and that has an order of magnitude spending that's a bit higher. The second one, but very close on the heels, was stabilizing our employers, both for-profit and not-for-profit. We didn't want the nonprofit sector forgotten. There's 17% of our employment base is in nonprofits, critically important to our future. And then the third, by really an order of magnitude, was the investment in infrastructure, because infrastructure is really a long-term investment, and that will be center to our next piece of work. So you can know within the 3 categories, those are in priority order from the committee. But within each of the categories, supporting Maine people, those individual recommendations are in priority order. So stabilizing and supporting public health is critical. Childcare, next up and right on the heels. Bringing the pre-K through 12 system, supporting them in any way possible so that they can bring students back to their campuses. Higher ed, these are all central. And those are priority orders within supporting Maine people. Probably right after public health, childcare, and reopening of the education system was stabilizing our employers. So that is a high level of importance to everybody. People have to have something to go back to work to. We have to help these employers. And even our recommendation of 350, we recognize that is not enough. And we had committee members in the hospitality industry who know they need much more than that just for their sector alone. But they agreed that putting forward something that recognized their urgent need was better than just trying to accomplish everything. And I have to hand it to them, given their passion and the serious, absolutely critical daily nature of the threat to that industry. They stepped up as good teammates and prioritized taking care of children, taking care of getting our schools up and running, and then the employer grants. So it was everybody played their role in a way to better serve the governor and you folks. And they did the hard work of prioritizing and letting drop to the bottom the things that recognizing we can't do it all. So it was an amazing process that I think just was symbolic of what can be done by people who are headed towards the same vision with an enormous amount of passion and love of the state. And it was magical. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know if we can replicate it, but.
I mean, I think it's true that on any given recommendation, there were those that felt that it should be more and those that felt it should be less and those that felt it should be more specific or targeted. But what we were able to do was build sort of broad consensus, and to the extent that there was outlying opinions on those, we tried to surface those opinions and talk about them. And in many cases, particularly in our Quick Start proposal, we actually outlined what those opinions were, because ultimately, we're not a judicial or legislative body, and so we don't necessarily have a process to have a so-called minority report. But ultimately, we wanted to share what level of consensus we had, so that it was clear whether or not this was the ERC speaking as one, or the ERC speaking as the majority of its membership. And to the extent that there was ongoing concerns with either too high, too little, or not focused enough, we see those echoed and are well represented in the general conversation, both from advocacy groups and within the administration and the legislative body as a whole. We see those as live conversations.
I want to thank you both for being responsive to my question. You've helped me a lot in the context of putting the report in the right perspective, and the prioritization process, both within and across the three broad areas, had not come through to me in the reading. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Representative Keschel.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the report. It's obvious that a lot of hard work was jammed into a very short time period. So my question was in part discussed in response to Representative Millett's question. And it seems that the total need, as you defined it in your report, was bounded by the available resources. But there was apparently a discussion of total need. Did you bound that in any number? And that's the first question. The second question is, how were available resources defined? You talked a little bit about bond, you talked a little bit about federal stimulus, additional federal stimulus. Was there any consideration of perhaps using available resources from program reductions, good programs, but reducing these programs given that their priority in terms of what's going on with the crisis, the pandemic, perhaps may have been lowered? So was there any discussion of that in the term available resources?
Yeah, so on the topic of relative need versus absolute need, we had some sensitivity towards our view of what available resources could be. In particular, that's highlighted in the employer supports category. So the employer supports category, we recommended something like $350 million of supports, and there were industries that were coming out with their own reports that were saying their 2020, let alone 21, needs were orders of magnitude larger than that just for their industry, tourism, for example. And so in that particular recommendation, I think we tried to balance this sort of enormity of absolute need with realism on available sources. And I think we wound up striking a balance, which you would say that number does not comport with available resources, and also does not comport with the absolute need. I think on the others, in particular around the supporting Maine people, school reopening, and that sort of thing, I think we tried to quantify absolute need, recognizing that our information was more anecdotal than it was scientific. And so that quantification is, really ought to be subject to, more thorough scrubbing by the agencies involved in any implementation recommendations. But gross order of magnitude, we were trying to be in the ballpark of absolute need there. Relative to the potential sources, certainly the CARES Act state funds were front and center in our view, but we also understood that, and I don't have these numbers at my fingertips, but that we were facing real hardship at a state level in terms of decreased revenues. And so we assumed that there would be a conversation around how to make the budget work in future sessions here at the state level, and that there wouldn't be savings available from other sources from sort of the general biennial budget process, because our assumption was there'd be such revenue distress that those kinds of savings would wind up just funding, what services were provided. And so our assumption was, new federal sources, care sources, and bond sources. And, ultimately, not as appropriators, we tried not to be too specific about that. But I think, I don't know, I'm kind of looking at Lori as I say this, I don't think we discussed sort of reallocation of state budget, just given the general distress profile we assumed was coming.
No, and it was the immediacy of needing to invest now, and knowing that that process is a much longer one to decide how you would reallocate and how you would decide that, and that is certainly beyond our purview. Yeah, obviously it was an order of magnitude and in the right priority order that the group coalesced around this, with the recognition that those employer grants just are, there's a lot more that will be needed there. And we didn't want to put forth a set of recommendations that was so big, as if 1.1 billion isn't quite enough. We didn't want to put forward something that was just so ludicrous that it painted our committee and all their hard work as just being way out of touch with reality. So we balanced that.
So given that the need is now, and I've heard it said several times by you and others, that we need to do it now, and given the likelihood of some delay at the federal level, it looks like a lot of this is going to be delayed to some extent in any case. And even the bonding process, as you suggest, is a long-term process. So availability of the actual availability of resources limited, and perhaps to some of those cuts that'll even take time to make as well. So it's not looking necessarily like we'll get something soon.
It's very challenging in our view. And, one of the things that was, interesting and terrifying as it unfolded was how we were thinking about some of these problems as a committee morphed even in the few short weeks that we were in session. And so, at some level, we were grateful that those decisions hadn't been made by the time we got there. And even as we were coming into a glide slope of the final recommendations, even the night before, we were making some tweaks, recognizing that things were really changing quickly. And I think now, even as a little bit of time goes by, our report will become less tethered to the conditions of now. And I'm grateful that in some states we've seen sort of precipitous rush to make decisions around available resources, and Maine has been a bit more cautious, both not just with managing the healthcare emergency, but also on thinking about how to spend our limited resources here. And I think that level of deliberation will eventually come out to be to our benefit. Ultimately, we feel like the support Maine people recommendations in particular, we actually see some of those things unfolding now in the news on some of the state supports, but we're hopeful but realistic about what the timing of future federal support might be on this.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions, and then I think we're going to try to transition to the second part of this conversation, which is Commissioner Figueroa talking to us about the administration's plans for implementation. Well, following up, Mr. Broder and Ms. LaChance, on some of the questions that have been asked, I want to focus again a little bit on this $350 million what's called employer grants, and based on some of the back and forth I've heard, it seems to me that the recommendations as a whole seem to roughly dollar-wise line up with the amount of money available in the Corona relief funds. I mean, is it fair to say that some of these recommendations, that even though the work of the committee was not tied directly to those funds as a charge, that those kind of became the sort of the bookends in terms of the dollars of the recommendations? I guess what I sort of heard from Ms. LaChance, it sounds like, that $350 million could have been a lot more, and probably if there had been a $2 billion grant to the state of Maine for Corona relief funds, or a $2.5 billion, that some of these things would have been elastic based on the availability of those funds. Is that a pretty fair sort of assumption as I look at these?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Josh's point, I believe he said this fairly clearly. Most of these we had a pretty good sense of the order of magnitude.
Right.
The employer grants is one that I think, is a hungry beast. It could take everything you could give it. And
Well,
we just, yeah.
And it will
Sorry.
accordion as the pandemic continues. So, if you look at what federal supports came in for all the flaws of PPP and enhanced unemployment, actually pretty good programs that had the pandemic only lasted 120 days, would have forestalled much of the economic damage. But because this damage is continuing, I think this is what makes this number so difficult to pin down. And one of the reasons why you started to see us injecting, even in our early recommendations, some recommendations for supports for adaptation, for innovation, because even as we try and keep our small businesses alive in an ongoing emergency, we recognize that we don't know when it's going to end, and starting to invest in how to transform to be functional in this moment is also, part of our collective charge.
Yep. And I guess as another thing that jumps out at me is it seems to me, again, not just the dollar amount, but I mean, there's not really a strict box drawn around that money in terms of the types of businesses that would be available for those grants. So Representative Dunphy mentioned agricultural businesses. We've heard from a lot of healthcare businesses, which I don't think are specifically called out. I mean, I know there's been a lot of focus on restaurant business, hospitality business, tourist industry, but in a way, this is a pot of money that could have a lot of different types of businesses, seeking to get relief from that specific pot of money. Is that fair also?
That's exactly right. In fact, we, in our sort of conversations with the ECD on, giving our view at a high level of sort of guiding principles that might influence implementation, said, look, there's a seesaw here between the targeted quality of a program, having it have the maximum, most surgical impacts, and its speed and impact. And in this case, we were a bit more on the speed and impact side of this equation, thinking that we could all debate for many months the relative merits of agriculture to healthcare to small business to nonprofit, but ultimately small organizations that are employers need immediate support. And so our view was to have the broadest eligibility sort of characteristics possible and really focused on impact and speed and have a bias for small. So organizations that have the least capacity to absorb these kind of hits, getting money the fastest, and not, it may be a fruitful conversation to have a conversation about, should those dollars go to tourism or go to agriculture, but ultimately to be less discriminatory in that and focus on sort of size, capacity, and speed.
Yeah, we even had made some recommendations, just not within the report itself, but in our handoff to DECD to say, you might consider, as you look at this employer grant program, giving a head start to the smallest of businesses. Because as we saw in PPP, businesses that are of a certain scale that have their own CFO or controller or HR or, they have people, resources who could get the application in place. I know my CFO was working 24/7 on it so that Thomas could get in line for that. Critical for us. But if we were any smaller and didn't have a staff person who could get off their daily work to fill out these forms and be in constant conversation with the banks, it really put them at a disadvantage. So our guidance was just, let's get this out as quickly as possible, but really try to help those smallest of players, which is the vast majority of our main economy. So.
Thank you. Before we close, are there any other questions from any committee members? Senator Breen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me turn my picture back on. I want to echo, the thanks that you've heard from everybody here today, first of all. But secondly, I wanted to talk to you or ask you about your impression of the unemployment trust fund replenishing that we've been doing for businesses. We've already done, I think, 200 million or 160 million, 170 million. And we might be doing more by the end of September. So I wanted to check in with you both, because you have obviously a lot of employers at your table, and see if that has what I would say landed, given that everybody has enormous need, and $350 million just begins to help, especially smaller businesses who may not have gotten federal help. But as the governor has and the legislature passed this law to hold employers harmless for unemployment benefits that have gone out the door, and that we would be replenishing the fund, is that something that folks understand and register with them, or is that something like a small thing that kind of got glossed over? I'm just curious how it landed.
Yeah, so Representative Green, that's a really good question, and we understood that the ball was rolling on replenishing the fund as we got into our work, and so we specifically didn't take it up, knowing that already had momentum, and we were sort of focused on other things. We did hear from committee members all kinds of opinions on this, even though we didn't take it up, and I would say that, not just speaking for the committee, but also for the business community in general, there's probably not a full appreciation of the impacts to forward-looking unemployment taxes of having a fund in distress. And so the additional replenishment, in my view, you could view as a moment of tax avoidance. Certainly as a business person, we were going to spend that money. If it didn't come in from some other source, it was going to come back to the participants in the fund. And I don't think that there's a great public appreciation for that. I think there was some sense in the committee that the idea of spending money there would then make less money available just on a prioritization basis for general business supports. And so if you combine the perhaps lack of awareness about the immediate tax risk of the unemployment fund needing greater employer-based contribution, and this idea that there was a lot of pressure on available funds to do business supports, we heard some concerns about that tension, and I think a general lack of awareness about exactly how unemployment insurance works, candidly, among a lot of small businesses. So I would say, just to answer your question very directly, we didn't take it up in a formal or informal way, but we did hear opinions that were mixed, ranging from extremely supportive to concerned about the competition for those scarce dollars for a business support fund. Our view, if you look at our sort of philosophical underpinnings, where we said support Mainers first, obviously unemployment supports are an important component of that, but it wasn't part of the prioritization process that the committee did formally. As a business person, I thank you for doing it, though. I mean, it's tremendously helpful to not have a tax problem there on top of everything else that's going on.
Agree.
Representative Hubble.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say thank you again for this presentation, and to follow up on a comment of Representative Millett, who's recognizing that this was a complex process and depending on hard-won consensus. So I just want to say that it's my hope that this moment of urgency really gets recognized, and that these July 15th recommendations really carry some weight and some momentum and some respect with both branches, both the executive and the legislative. And the Appropriations Committee historically, I think, has recognized the value of that sort of work in its totality. So this is an effort that I'm really grateful for, and I am looking forward to carrying through on a bit. Again, recognizing that the ERC's work is going to continue for a while, but I see that we have a moment before us that I hope we can really take advantage of. And thank you again to the chairs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I think at this point we're going to transition. We're running a little bit later than I thought we were going to. So again, I want to thank Mr. Broder and Ms. LaChance. I'm hoping that we will see you back again as the committee continues its work, and really send our appreciation to all the members of the committee for the hard work that they did. And thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Figueroa, are you there? There you are. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you all.
So,
thank you. Oh, do you want to tee up?
No, I just wanted to set it up, Commissioner. So again, we were hoping, so this is sort of part two, right? So we heard from the ERC chairs. They've given the governor this report. I believe I heard them say that they were sort of the implementation, a lot of the details, around the timing of how some of the things were going to move forward were really more in the hands of the administration and the charge of the ERC. So I'd love to hear the latest about what's going on with implementation of things within this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Kirsten Figueroa, Commissioner of the Department of Administrative and Financial Services. Thank you, Senator Breen, Representative Katine, and members of Appropriations. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Mills administration's plans and those actions already taken regarding the Economic Recovery Committee recommendations. Governor Mills has been routinely updated by the ERC and well briefed on the specifics of their July 15th report. Additionally, the governor is in receipt of the July 24th letter from the Democrat members of this committee. As the governor has pointed out, the data and recommendations gathered from these committees, as well as from each of her commissioners and department heads from their affected sectors, provides valuable insight to inform decisions made daily to successfully navigate Maine through this pandemic. Maine's economy has been affected by the pandemic in different ways attributable to our demographics. Our large service sector, our high percentage of older individuals, our proximity to New Hampshire, Quebec, and New Brunswick, and our large number of nonprofits, small businesses, and seasonal enterprises. Maine's agriculture sector and commercial fisheries depend on restaurants, banquets, university cafeterias, and school lunch programs, which have closed or reduced their capacity to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Tourism has been and will continue to be impacted by COVID-19's limits on travel, changing modes of recreation, and lower consumer spending. Healthcare, manufacturing, childcare, the arts, and higher education all face new pressures and challenges. At the same time, there are opportunities to reimagine how we do everything, from business to healthcare to recreation to education, how we elevate the lives of lower and middle income families, how we eliminate disparities in rural and urban populations, and how we invite new investments in and new models of business, communication, and innovation. The ERC chairs and committee members, on a volunteer basis and on their own time, have dedicated hundreds of hours to examine the great disruption caused by the pandemic and to report back on the impacts to the Maine economy, to make recommendations for policy changes to address these impacts, and to help our state meet the challenges of the future. The governor appreciates that it was nearly impossible to focus on the future part of their charge without also evaluating and recommending immediate action. She thanks them for their thoughtful consideration and recommendations, while also appreciating their conclusion that not all needs will be met, and that Maine, like all states, reiterates the urgent need for further federal stimulus action. As the administration has consistently stated since the beginning of the pandemic, and as confirmed by the work of the ERC and legislative committees, Maine's economic recovery and protecting and ensuring public health are interconnected. As we just heard, the ERC has organized this interconnection into categories that support Maine's workforce, businesses and nonprofits, including Maine's heritage farming, fishing, and forestry industries, education and childcare, and creating and ensuring a foundation for future sustainability and growth. Specifically to the administration's plans and actions and timing in regard to the ERC recommendations. In supporting Maine people, the administration, since Governor Mills took office, has worked to rebuild a public health infrastructure that had been defunded and eroded over many years. These efforts better positioned Maine to respond to this pandemic, and the governor thanks Commissioner Lambrou, Dr. Shaw, and the dedicated staff at CDC for their unwavering commitments to shepherding Maine through this unprecedented time. As previously reported and updated weekly in a spreadsheet and soon to be available in pie chart form, posted on the Bureau of Budget website, there have been specific uses of the 1.25 billion coronavirus relief funds, CRF, for public health efforts, including 18.6 million for personal protective equipment for the state stockpile, which is distributed statewide to Maine's healthcare network, 13 million through grants to Maine's municipalities for the public health campaign, Keep Maine Healthy, 2.8 million for contact tracing, community supports, and contracts to bolster the 52.7 million CARES grant direct to DHHS for testing and related activity. These efforts are in conjunction with certain federal government actions, such as PPE via Maine's Emergency Management Agency and PPE and testing supplies direct to nursing facilities. As highlighted by our Maine Department of Education, supported by the ERC recommendations, and now also highlighted at the national level, the education and care of our children is an essential measure to allow families and employers to plan for the future. The governor appreciates the significant efforts of Commissioner Macon, her committed team, and the educator community. The Maine Department of Education, in close collaboration with school districts' collaboration planning teams, has created a framework for returning to classroom instruction that provides options, ideas, and considerations for organizing the work of reintegrating back to in-person classroom instruction. Recently, with the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention, MDOE updated this framework to include health and safety precautions that all schools must follow if they decide to return to in-classroom instruction to ensure the safety and well-being of students and staff. MDOE estimates the cost of the statewide effort to be approximately $328 million. The governor has dedicated up to $165 million in CRF be distributed to school systems across Maine for the first phase of this preparation, and that application process has commenced. Education at all levels, PK through 12, higher education, and workforce development is currently being discussed at the national level. While Maine higher eds received approximately 44 million direct funds via CARES, much of these funds were required to be distributed directly to the students and don't go far enough to cover expenses and revenue losses faced by Maine's higher education system. Maine joins the other 49 states in encouraging the White House and Congress to fund these critical investments in the health and safety of the nation's children, students, and employees. Governor Mills has dedicated $8.4 million of CRF be paid to more than 1,700 Maine child care providers for the extra costs and challenges of operating during the pandemic. This, in addition to the previously announced $11 million in CARES Act funding for Maine, which is focusing on child care providers that are open and providing care by September 8, 2020. Taken together, these child care investments meet the bipartisan policy's recommended amount needed for child care providers to remain open or reopen in the face of the pandemic. Approximately 50% of Maine's licensed child care providers have remained open throughout. Since May, DHHS and OCFS has encouraged and seen many closed providers reopen, and as of July 17th, nearly 80% of all providers are open in Maine. The administration will continue to evaluate childcare and out-of-school care based on the reopening of schools and the metrics of the health crisis. Additionally, the governor has committed $35 million from CRF to assist local and tribal governments and other entities that qualify for Federal Emergency Management Agency assistance with incurred COVID-19 expenses. Specifically, the $35 million is intended to provide the 25% match against FEMA's Public Assistance Program Major Disaster Declaration, which traditionally covers the other 75% of eligible expenses. Again, as previously stated, the governor, as part of the National Governors Association, continues to encourage the loosening of restrictions of CRF such that lost revenues could also be an eligible expense. With the $600 in additional federal unemployment benefits scheduled to expire, the governor is deeply concerned about the housing cliff that many Maine people, particularly low-income Maine people, may face. The governor recently signed a financial order dedicating $2.2 million in federal community development block grant funding to address emergency housing needs for low and moderate income people as a result of COVID-19. As her administration evaluates the Economic Recovery Committee's recommendations around rental assistance, rapid rehousing, and eviction prevention, it will continue to work closely with Maine Housing and others to see what actionable steps can be taken immediately to protect people affected by COVID-19 from experiencing homelessness. Additionally, the governor appreciates the committee's recommendations for bonding in this low interest environment to ensure ongoing investment in Maine's talent, infrastructure, and innovation. She is pleased that Maine citizens also recognize the importance of these efforts by recently voting in favor of Maine's Connections Bond, with $15 million for broadband and $105 million for Maine's transportation network. But as noted, there is an estimated $600 million deficit in broadband internet investment in Maine. Also, COVID-19 related challenges are mission critical for the Department of Transportation. Without emergency relief, DOT's 1,800 jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in capital projects are at risk. This in turn jeopardizes safety and operational effectiveness of Maine's highways and bridge system, and thousands more private sector construction and indirect jobs. Turning to Maine's employers. To date, the governor has approved the transfer of $270 million of CRF to backfill payments made from Maine's Unemployment Trust Fund through June 30th. The trust fund is funded by tax payments from 45,000 businesses, representing 607,000 employees. Using these CRF funds will minimize future tax increases for these employers, which could be as high as 120%, which means those dollars are available for employers to spend on items such as employee payroll and benefits, rather than a tax increase. It is estimated that another $170 million will be needed for the period of July 1 through September 30. Continuing certain unemployment programs is another topic currently being discussed as part of federal stimulus effort number 4. Businesses and nonprofits have been impacted by the pandemic at different levels. The governor thanks Commissioner Johnson and her small but mighty team at DECD for their unwavering commitment to supporting, communicating, and advocating on behalf of Maine's business community. The department has been working with organizations directly and compiling data to have more detail. Federal programs have been helpful, and Maine financial institutions have been working closely with businesses on deferrals. There is still funding in the PPP program, and we encourage Maine businesses to utilize that program. Again, the governor, through the NGA, is encouraging the federal government to expand and extend previously established programs such as PPP, as these options are running out or are too restrictive. For instance, many of our Maine businesses struggle with the fixed cost component that aren't payroll related. As for the business supports recommendation by ERC, we know the impact is much larger than any support program we can develop, but the administration is committed to working closely with businesses to find the best path forward to help as many as possible. The next step is to more specifically quantify the impact of COVID-19 on Maine's employer community, including our tourism industry and our heritage fishing, farming, and forestry industries. This would include understanding revenue losses, business disruption, resources used, as well as other documented COVID-19 impacts, assessment of needs, and future projections. Businesses should have a good sense for their projections now that they've been operating for a couple of months under COVID protocols. The administration has drafted a pre-application proposal which we would like to forward by the end of today to AFC and ERC or subcommittees thereof. We would appreciate the review, input, and edits, hopefully by this Friday, so that we could post the pre-application online and available to the business community by next Monday. DECD will socialize the plan with businesses and nonprofits this week in preparation. While we haven't finalized the exact specifications of a business support program, we will continue to work that aspect while gathering this information and keeping tabs on the federal efforts. Once we have specific business information, we will compile it and bring program outline considerations to AFA for legislative input. The total of the above CRF commitments is approximately $584 million, not including the second phase of education or additional transfers to unemployment trust fund, or in the case of additional flexibility from the federal government, any revenue loss backfill. As touched upon throughout, the governor, separately and with the NGA, continues to advocate for Maine with Maine's congressional delegation. She sent a comprehensive letter on May 14th, and as part of your online documents today, you will find her most recent letter dated July 20th. In both, the governor reminds our delegation that Maine's economic and fiscal position was solid going into this pandemic. Nevertheless, the overarching and all-consuming pandemic shows an impact of well more than the $1.25 billion of CRF could cover. The most recent letter shows more than $3 billion, but it is not all-inclusive, and for certain items like business support, still unquantified. The governor notes that the support Congress has provided to date has been critical to preserving Maine's health and initial economic needs, but that further action by the federal government is urgently needed to provide necessary relief to Maine citizens and all sectors of our economy, local and tribal governments, state government, education, business, tourism, healthcare, nonprofits, through flexibility of the funds already sent to the state, as well as with additional funding. All this is to say that Maine has accomplished so much in what feels like years, but has been 3 months since the receipt and initial guidance of the CRF monies. One final note, the governor wishes to express her appreciation to all Maine citizens for continued patience and cooperation. Maine has kept our COVID-19 numbers low in comparison to other states because we've done the right thing. We are and continue to be in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm going to open it up to the committee for any comments or questions. I have a couple. I can. Commissioner, let me just sort of parse a little bit some of the things I think I heard. Again, I really appreciate the level of detail you just gave us and have done so throughout this entire process. You've been very available and very present with this committee and have given us a lot of information and kept us updated. So I want to drill in on what you sort of said about 3/4 way through the remarks about a pre-application proposal. I believe it's directed towards what I would, cross-reference to the ERC report to the employer grants, or, it seems like a business support program that I assume aligns with that one specific part of the ERC proposal. So you're going to provide the AFA committee and the ERC with a draft of what this application is going to look like and ask for our comments in very short order. And so this is possibly going to form the basis of a grant program. Can you tell us a little bit more about the basic program and what the administration is thinking? And if you can, about the, if at all possible, the thinking around the number of dollars and any restrictions on who would be eligible for it. I'd just like a little bit more detail in terms of what the thoughts are from the administration on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the point made by ERC about small businesses first is important. Smaller businesses, sole proprietors, et cetera. It's important. I think basically what we're trying to do now is quantify the need because there have been a number of resources available There have been different impacts to different sectors. And so now understanding a size of a business, the ability of the business to take advantage of PPP or unemployment, the ability of the business to defer or access cash reserves, et cetera, will all be included. And understanding possibly impacts from a comparison of maybe a prior period of times operations versus now a disrupted period of time operations. All that would kind of be captured so that we could understand and be able to better quantify. We all are saying that we don't believe that there are enough funds to meet all of the needs, but we don't, to your questions earlier and to ERC, there really hasn't, there's no way yet to have quantified the need. And so that would be our next step. But in the spirit of trying to move things along, which as you listened, the administration and the legislature have taken action almost in lockstep with the ERC's recommendations. Public health, pay attention to the pandemic, support Maine people, think about education, and now understand how you could support the businesses. There's a lot of information that we know now in the past 2 months, including a successful reopening of the state that will also help inform what those businesses might need to get from here to there. So that is the proposal. And we've heard from everybody that this next step should be as efficient as possible. And so while we collect information from one side, we'll be evaluating what comes in and what some of our options are from another side, so that hopefully those two things can meet in the middle, and we'll be able to kind of hit the ground running relatively quickly with what I would anticipate is going to be a phased approach, depending on what we hear from businesses, and also hopefully what we hear from the federal government for stimulus number 4.
Commissioner, thank you for that answer. When I would listen to Mr. Chance and Mr. Broder present, I was thinking about starting to keep tallying of the times that they use the word speed. I mean, I think one of the themes that they were trying to convey was a sense of urgency, and I know that the administration has urgency and we have urgency. Do you have any sort of even a rough timeline you could share with us in terms of the development of this program and when it would be available to businesses? I mean, are we thinking a matter of a couple of weeks or a few weeks or a longer period? It seems there's a lot of pre-work still in terms of scoping it out that still needs to be done, but I was wondering.
Well, I would say, that, right, as mentioned, the Department of Economic and Community Development has been working with these organizations all along, has data. Our economist, a state economist, right, has data. As we've been talking, every week that goes by, we have a little bit more information about what we didn't know before. And so I believe that our hope would be if we could get edits and finalize and have a link out on the website. I think most businesses are ready with that information based on conversations with DECD. And so I would suggest that our timeline isn't very long for having people be able to submit their information. And then it would be about understanding, we're going to need a minute just to see what comes in and understand, okay, what are we seeing and what options do we have? Has anything happened at the federal level? Where are we with what we think the most critical need is, and could we do something about that? I'm always hesitant, but I'd say August. We're in August. For sure, not going beyond August, I would say, for trying to figure this out.
Commissioner, and then is the idea that there would be and I know we're all watching very carefully, a little bit in a sort of a frustrated way what's going on down in Washington, D.C. I was hoping by the time we met today on July 27th, we'd have a little bit more clarity, but that's, we don't control that. Is the idea at this point that there would be a certain amount of money from the CRF, like dedicated to this program, and businesses would be able to apply and receive that money basically until it was depleted. Is that the concept?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Just what that number is, I think, is still.
Yep. Under discussion. Representative Purse, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on, I'm just trying to kind of understand the sequencing and what businesses, what actions they need to take. So there's going to be a survey, for lack of a better word, but that's not an application. That's just a survey. And then there would be a secondary application. And then my second question would be, I know you've received a lot of information from different industries, right, on how they feel some of this money should be spent and how it could go to the best possible use for these small businesses. And are you incorporating some of that information as well in addition to the ERC?
Yes. So the first thing that I'd like to say is that no, it's not a survey. We're calling it a pre-application so that we gather enough information such that we could make decisions and then move from there with that information. So we wouldn't have to go out again unless the pre-app was maybe not completed. But the expectation is that we gather enough information that we could use that. As far as, yes, the information has been incorporated. It is DECD who has put together, right, I know a lot of people have commented on New Hampshire's Main Street program. We've used that grant. We've used, DECD has used information that it's gleaned from organizations in the questions that need to be asked to get us to the bottom line impact.
And could I just follow up? Thank
Sure,
you. That clarifies that quite a bit for me. Thank you. I do think that when you're thinking about a lot of these businesses that range in how big they are, what services they provide, you know, how they're struggling, that there would be a broad range of opportunity just to receive cash in to decide how best to use that, as opposed to, well, you only can use it for rent relief. I'm hoping you're thinking it in terms of in that manner a little bit.
Okay, so that is a really good opportunity for us to say that the CRF funds do still have restrictions. Although they talk about business disruption, there are, you know, certain restrictions. Like we can't just put out a per capita dollar amount based on, let's say, you know, every business that's the size of 1 to 10 gets X dollars and every business 10 to 50 gets X. We can't do that, which is why the application will talk about business disruption, an assessment of need, resources that were already used, the, you know, COVID related expenses. But all that would be taken into consideration.
Thank you.
So I've got Representative Martin and Senator Breen in the queue. Representative Martin, go ahead. John, I think you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me okay?
I can now, John. So start over, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm sure that most have not been to Aroostook lately, but potentially another disaster could well be in the making unless something changes because of weather. The potato crop and the broccoli crop could very well be adversely affected by what's going on, and so that will have a major impact not only on farmers but all the industry that supports the farming industry. And I just raise that as a potential danger for all of us and the impact that it could have. Obviously, we have no answer to that because obviously whether we get rain is not within our jurisdiction.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Breen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Representative Dunphy might have her hand up if you have, okay.
I've got her on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see you, and appreciate the invitation to participate in developing the pre-application. And I certainly appreciate that time is of the essence. So I like the idea of a subcommittee of AFA maybe signing up to do that this week so that we don't slow down your process at all. But we can talk about that afterwards. I know that I'm in receipt, my co-chair's in receipt, and I'm checking if you are also in receipt that there have been proposals that have come to us from certain sectors that have asked for a certain number to set up, for instance, a nonprofit relief fund. I think their request was 50 million from Maine Association of Nonprofits. We also had some testimony here in our committee. For instance, the Behavioral Health Collective suggested a $15 million, that's a $15 million fund. So I'm wondering if the administration is considering subsets like that, where there would be some chunks of money directed towards certain sectors of the economy, or if you're gonna, if in your mind now, if it's more like a come one, come all, based more on size, or whether or not they've been eligible for other relief. You know, because as we all acknowledge, we don't have enough to meet the need. And so we're going to have to figure out a way to slice and dice it. So I'm trying to figure out, is one of your ways to slice and dice it through industry sector, or do you have other ways that you're thinking about that? Thank you.
I think that honestly, the answer will come, and as part of the reason for the pre-application is to kind of understand how the responses, and whether or not there needs to be some setting aside by a particular group, or just what floats to the top as being the most critical need, regardless of what category they might fall into.
So at this point, you don't know, you're not.
I think that, you know, there's a number of things that are different based on different business experiences. The timing of opening is one. For another is that commercial fishing in Maine, although it did not get nearly enough, got something, which was more than what agriculture got, because most of the funding from federal government went to the bigger farms out west. So those are all things that, you know, once you start looking down a piece of paper that actually quantifies everything the same, maybe helps you understand a little bit more of right, what bubbles to the top as a group that might need first priority, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Dunphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. My question was somewhat similar to Senator Breen's, in that I was wondering what the filters were going to be, and whether or not the disbursement would be equitable across different sectors. And you know, you do mention specifically agriculture, and that's a lens that I think about a lot, because while there was a lot of federal government monies, Maine did not get any of those because of the timing of the virus coming in when our crops were just starting. So they did tend to go to big ag, et cetera. And I also appreciated what Ms. LaChance had said about, you know, some businesses have a CFO, or, you know, they may have an accountant or somebody that's well-versed in the grant process. But a lot of farmers and a lot of other businesses across a lot of other sectors don't have that. And I am particularly interested in the filters that will be used for the money, and, you know, the disparity of funds that may have been available for some areas, but not for others. And I also feel like it's important to have it balanced and equitable. And so I guess, you know, I don't know if that's technically a question or not, or just support for what Senator Breen said and you've already addressed, but I wanted to say that as well.
I mean, you know, as we indicated, as we collect that information, we'll be able to report out on it, and then maybe that further informs discussions that we can have. Again, staggering any kind of program rollout based on the largest need/impact that comes from that pre-application or application process. Impact application is what we're calling it, but I keep tripping over that.
Thank you. Commissioner, is it fair to say, I mean, is this program primarily being developed within DECD? Is that what you said?
DECD, well, our administration is a collaborative one. DECD started the document. We have, as we've mentioned, a couple of people working in Bureau of Budget on CRF, and she's helped with some research, so she can help she's helped with some research on the other states so that we can add some of those components into the document. And of course, DECD reached out to the Department of Marine Resources, the Department of Agriculture, and Conservation and Forestry for their input as well. So it is DECD that will head it. It will probably be a combination of people within the administration that are kind of working through the process of reviewing and documenting, right? Checking the boxes off as well. So, but yes.
Thank you. Representative Cashel, do you have a question?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, I do. And it probably moves away from the discussion we're having here because most of this discussion has been around the availability of federal money coming into the state and all of that. But given the huge need that we all recognize that's out there, has the administration looked at existing programs and what reductions by making reductions in perhaps good and useful programs, but given the crisis may not be as necessary now, what reductions they might provide in terms of helping to fill this enormous gap we're facing rather than relying on solely the federal monies?
So it's a combination effort because of course, at the same time that we have this CRF and other stimulus programs from the feds, we also have a close to a fiscal year and an upcoming revenue forecast and FY21 shortfall that we know is coming. I think I am here to say that I think the work of every commissioner every day is figuring out how we can support our ongoing efforts as well as, you know, understand the impacts that have been added as a result of COVID. And that is currently what we're all doing, is juggling and trying to figure out which is part of the complication. There's not enough monies, but plenty of need. And so how we can parse out the funds to help support, but not completely take care of certain efforts. But I think that is a larger conversation that is definitely upcoming as we work through our FY21 needs and our FY22 and 23 biennial budget, which of course is due to the legislature at the beginning of January.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Breen, then Representative Millett.
Just a quick follow-up to that particular point. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Figueroa, hasn't the administration at some point in recent months already put in a hiring freeze and a freeze on any non-essential spending? Is that correct? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. Yes, because we did shift a little bit into budget and conversations. So yes, as soon as the pandemic hit, actually the governor, when we realized that, or right, when the legislature and the administration kind of reversed course, came to a emergency supplemental, the governor at that time put in a soft hiring freeze in that emergency needs could be documented and still moved forward. Emergency not necessarily being COVID, but also recognizing some of the emergencies that we've continued to talk about throughout our last year and a half together, like child and family services, for instance, as well as a review of any unencumbered balance forward requests or reserve requests that were in FY20. And I think that you have some information coming to you about how our efforts were as we closed out FY20. And those are still in place, actually, because we know that 2 days from now we'll have a revenue forecast that will more closely pinpoint the number that we're talking about rather than the stress test numbers we've been using. And so those measures are still in place today. Thank you.
Representative Millet, I see your hand up.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I want to use the word priority a couple of times here, but as I listen to your statement and your listing of the what I'd call the allotted monies or the committed monies or the governor's priorities at this point in time, totaling $584 million, it seemed to me that maybe you were suggesting you had already done an update of the coronavirus relief fund summary that we were given dated July 17th. And it includes, I think, items that, as you listed them, that would pass muster under the current flexibility or lack thereof of the CARES money plus the interest earned, and within the framework of the frequently asked questions that you deal with every day, I'm sure, would fit within those programs. Am I correct in your assumption of the 584 million tabulation? Is that basically building on what you've given us just recently?
Yes, the spreadsheet that shows the items such as the unemployment, trust fund backfill, the PPE, the education phase 1, that all adds up. I said 584, it looks like it's 582, so it looks like I mistyped a number there, but our commitments to date are approximately 582 million. And that spreadsheet is on the Bureau of Budget's website and is updated weekly. The last update was July 22nd. We try to have it done by the end of Wednesday each week. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, you've given me an anchor to work from, and I appreciate that. And all I'm trying to do is say the application that you're working on for businesses and the comments we've heard today on agriculture and other sectors of the economy, and obviously reflecting against the chart of priorities from the ERC, everything beyond the 584 will have to fit a new prioritization process based upon the flexibility that may come in the next iteration from Congress and any supplemental monies that might come from that as well. So it seems to me like you're alerting us to the fact that absent a huge transfer of additional resources and maximum flexibility, we all have a lot of prioritizing to do to get us through 20 and 21. And it seems to me you alluded to an answer to Representative Keshel's question that as you prepare for the 22-23 budget, your cabinet members are probably being asked to do a lot of prioritization of what is really essential going forward. So this doesn't require an answer. I'm just feeling that there are two levels of prioritization going on, maybe multiple levels, in addition to what we heard from ERC this morning, and that is to reflect upon where we are with the information we'll get this afternoon from Chris Nolan, the forecast on the 29th, and hopefully some knowledge of what Congress is going to do within the near term, we're going to have to do a lot of prioritizing to address the most urgent needs biennium, current biennium, and next biennium in the near term. So I think you've alerted us to a lot of work lying ahead of us, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Senator Sanborn.
Yes, thank you very much for being here with us today. I just wanted to kind of switch gears and go back to a bond package that was raised both by the ERC report, and I know Representative Hubble tried to dig in to that a little bit further as far as making it a bit broader. I know you know that the majority of the legislature anyway would like to go back in session, and are hoping that the governor will recall us in regards to a lot of work that needs to be done. But a couple of comments that the chairs of the ERC committee made really impressed me. I know that Mr. Broder said that Maine didn't fare well in the ARA funds, secondary to a lack of state investment, and that state investment can bring increased federal leverage. And Lori LaChance commented that wait and hope are not a strategy, something that I've heard from many different people recently, and that it's necessary to take charge of our own future. So I thought those were great points, and I just wondered if you can give us any other insight into whether the administration would be looking more towards bonds, and if the legislature could be helpful in coming back to take that kind of action.
I think I will answer that by saying that the governor has consistently said, and we would all point out, that this is an incredible interest rate environment for bonding, and that we do have some significant infrastructure issues in the state. We were talking about a number of those before we had COVID come to town. As for next steps on that, I would defer to the governor's office being able to give a response to that question. And we'll pass it on.
Any other questions for Commissioner? Commissioner, the only thing I'm going to say, the only comment I'm going to make in terms of closing is again, I am also happy that you flagged the issue with respect to the looming crisis with evictions and the ability of people to, meet their essential needs in terms of, specifically in terms of paying rent. I'm glad to hear that the governor is looking at that recommendation from the ERC seriously, and talking to Maine State Housing and others. And I'm certainly going to continue to be very interested in how that resolves. I know we're moving into a conversation with the judicial branch in a couple of minutes, and again, I'm very, very concerned about what's going to happen to folks when we have this sort of perfect storm of the additional unemployment benefits that are federally funded expiring in a few days, and then our court system opening up more broadly, over the course of a few weeks. And I'm incredibly concerned about people's ability to pay their rent and landlords' abilities to pay their mortgages to banks. And I think there's a ripple effect that will reverberate in multiple directions as we move forward if that issue is not urgently addressed. So again, I appreciate you bringing it up, and ask that you please keep us updated on that. Okay, are we ready to transition to Mr. Glessner from the judicial branch? I don't see any more questions for Commissioner Figueroa. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Glessner, thank you for joining us today. And you got to take, there you go, you're off mute now.
Had to get unmuted there. Thank you, Representative Katine. So I will jump right in if I'm invited to do so, Representative.
Yeah, please. Do you have a hard stop, Mr. Glessner, at a certain time? I think when we were planning this, we were told we might have some time restraints today. We're running a little late. I apologize.
I I do, but we'll take whatever time we need. I've got a
Thank you.
conflict, significant conflict, but this is the priority for the moment, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak to you. So what I want to do is I've submitted to you some written information. That is a copy of a presentation I would make. I'm not going to read that to you, but I'm going to reference that as I go through some comments here. And then also a couple of documents related to expenditures we've made, and then be happy to answer any questions that you want. If we're okay proceeding that way, then I'll jump right in and begin.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to thank you for the invitation to be here, to be able to talk to you about the judicial branch and what we're dealing with in terms of the pandemic. I did want to note that this is the 28th consecutive year that I've come before your committee to talk about judicial branch budget issues, and I've never seen anything quite like this, and I think others would feel the same. An unprecedented set of circumstances, but I'm very proud of the work that's being done by the folks in the judicial branch to try to get us through this and to meet the needs of the public. From the beginning, with regard to the coronavirus, what we have done is to try to strike a balance between two goals that we have, and those goals at times are in conflict, so we have to try to reconcile them as best we can. One of them is to provide access to justice. People have to have access to the court system. And the other is to ensure the safety of the public and our employees. Access to justice for some people means coming into the courthouse, looking out for people's safety under this coronavirus situation means keeping people out of the courthouse, and we're trying to reconcile the two. I will tell you that the courts have remained open from the beginning of the pandemic. Now, that's only been for the most serious cases involving life and liberty interests as we began. And we've done so on a limited basis in the beginning, not all courts all the time, but we've gradually gone through a process of reopening. But we feel that under these circumstances, the people need the courts now as much as ever. Certain kinds of cases, whether we're talking about protection from abuse or child protection matters or criminal proceedings and so forth, they don't stop because of the virus. There still is a need for the courts to address them, and that's what we are attempting to do to the best of our efforts. So we started out in March, the beginning of the pandemic, trying to deal with the the highest priority, those that were of an emergency nature. The Supreme Court has issued a series of emergency orders. They've all been on our website, readily available, while maintaining this goal of limiting the transmission of COVID. So trying to ensure access to justice for those who need our protections. This has not been any small task. The basic concept of a court proceeding, generally we think of it as involving in-person appearances. People come together in the courtroom before a judge. But under these circumstances, we realize that most of these courtrooms are small, and under normal circumstances, they offer minimal space. Much of our business is still conducted by paper. We've been diligently working on technology solutions so we could automate our operations and implement the electronic filing of court documents, but we're still 2 years away from having that every place statewide. So given those limitations and the public health crisis, in March, the Supreme Judicial Court issued the first emergency order. It provided that courts would schedule and hear only limited matters. And in that first phase, that included arraignments and first appearances of defendants who are held in custody, motions for review of bail, juvenile detention hearings, protection from abuse requests and hearings, and a small number of other limited matters, but things that we identify as priority cases. Also, March 22nd, Judicial Branch announced that it was reducing operations in courthouses throughout the state. That again, as a means to protect the public and to protect our employees who work in those courthouses. The Supreme Court, as I say, has issued a series of these emergency orders and has continued to update them. And then as we sort of got our bearings and we're dealing with what we had to on an emergency basis, we immediately had to turn our eye to the future and talk about, as this emergency progressed, we're going to have to develop a plan to resume full operations. But of course, doing so, there's a lot of challenges to that. So the Supreme Court created a plan, a phased management plan that has 5 phases, has a process for increasing the number of cases and kinds of cases to be handled, and addressing the backlog of cases that has continued to build. And the plan sets out guidelines that have to be met for each one of these phases. We have to have necessary staffing. That seems obvious, but we've had people not at the courthouses, so we had to decide who needed to be on site, had to make sure there was available technology as that was needed, and had to ensure that there was personal protective equipment in place. In a short period of time, the court system has had to adapt to these changing circumstances, and to a great extent, we've turned to technology solutions, and in particular, the use of video conferencing so that we could resume operations and address the backlog of cases as quickly as we could. So this move toward a more virtual hearing system is really a historic shift in judicial branch operations. It's just a different way of looking at things, doing things. So video conferencing has become an important tool, and the Supreme Judicial Court has directed that hearings be conducted remotely where possible by video in order to limit people's potential exposure to the virus. And when we do that, then you have to take into account the need for things like closed captioning for hearing impaired litigants, and breakout rooms for confidential attorney-client conversations, and other kinds of things that even for the seemingly simplest of cases needs to be available. One of the things that we did was to purchase licenses for Zoom. We took the time, or people took the time to take a look at the different platforms that were available, what might be the best system to use, and we found that Zoom met those requirements. So we went forward and purchased those licenses so that we could roll them out so that our people would have them available for conducting hearings. And we're in the early phases of some of that. Our technology people also researched and made recommendations about solutions to make sure that the participants could all see and hear one another, regardless of where they were. And also, while integrating interpreter services, we have to think about witness testimony, document presentation, electronic document signing, large file transfers, and so forth. So there's a whole lot of complicated pieces, as you can appreciate, that had to be taken into consideration. And then recognizing the need for open court proceedings, we've worked hard to develop and implement solutions so that members of the public, including the press, can have access to public court proceedings. That's while taking into account the limited courthouse capacity that we have and the move to remote hearings. So what we did was earlier on submit a request for federal funds in the hope that that would support these technology solutions, allow us to handle more cases and address this backlog in an efficient and safe manner. So efforts to keep the court system operational without physical access to a courthouse have meant finding these digital ways to do things that had primarily been done in person. And it turns out that one of our ongoing initiatives, our automated case management and e-filing system, is among the most critical tools to address the pandemic. Because with that kind of a system, people can work remotely. Cases can be filed remotely. Staff can deal with them remotely, and you're not locked into being in the courthouse. The automated case management system that we have, we initially implemented that for the Violations Bureau. That was a good way to get it up and running statewide, but on that limited docket. And we've been working to implement the system for all cases in all of our courts. And that hard work is paid off, and we're on target, still on target, in spite of everything that's happened, to implement that system in Bangor for most of our family and civil matters this fall. And then from there, we'll continue on, additional case types, all courts, all regions, and have it entirely rolled out, starting this spring and then through the year 2022. And one thing we know is the court systems around the country that have implemented similar systems prior to the pandemic, they've reported experiencing far less disruption to operations and have been able to shift to remote court proceedings more easily. I know in talking to my colleagues in New Jersey, they talked about the high number of their people who could work from home or work remotely because of the electronic system that they had. And it greatly reduced the disruption to the processing of their cases. Excuse me. Video conferencing, though, is not a solution for all court proceedings. There are concerns about due process and the fact that some litigants lack access to technology and so forth. So there are difficulties in dealing with a remote solution for certain case types. And in particular, it's a problem for jury trials. So when you think about bringing 12 people into the courthouse to sit in a jury box with the social distancing requirements, you might be able, in that same amount of square footage, you might be able to have 3 people. I mean, where do the rest of them go? How do you deal with that? and those are major problems that courts around the country are dealing with. So managing traffic flow throughout the courts, that's been a challenge, including with the jurors. And another thing is that the shifting guidance from the CDC, as more is learned about the virus, has meant that our responses have had to be nimble, and they have to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Something we're told that's acceptable one day, there's further research that's done or whatever, and the federal CDC comes back and says that's not a good answer any longer. We actually have a team that meets at the start and the end of every workday, whose job it is to discuss any COVID-related issues that have come up. And there's something almost every day. We deal with it at the beginning of the day, end of the day, what has happened overnight, weekends and so forth. So we have this very active team meeting twice a day. I thought we might need that at the beginning, but we still use it every day. For case types that have to be in person, we've developed procedures and protocols, and we've come up with recommendations for facility enhancements so that people will be safe. We did a statewide analysis of all of the facilities, identified maximum capacity limits for each space consistent with the guidelines. The review is confirmed, but we thought very few of our courtrooms are designed to accommodate large groups under pandemic circumstances. So we have to think about how we handle those large dockets. As I mentioned, jury trials, because of the problems there, they've been delayed. We're not doing jury trials. We're saying at the soonest we might be able to do them in some locations in September, but there's still huge hurdles that we have to face there. And then we've been following the guidance that we've been able to get and gotten a lot of support from the Maine CDC and from the governor's office. And we're requiring people who enter a courthouse to wear cloth face coverings. If they don't have one, we give something to them when they come in. We don't have funding specifically in our budget for that, but we've had to go forward and make purchases of various equipment. But we have to do that to make sure that the protective equipment is in place. I do want to say, as I said in my notes, that we're grateful to the executive branch, especially DAFS and the Department of Corrections. They were both helpful for assisting us in providing the equipment that we needed, and in some circumstances, being able to give that to us when we needed it. We've also looked at installing barriers in critical locations in our courthouses, but we've had to use our basic budget to move things around. Representative Millett was talking earlier about priorities, and that's what we've had to do. Suddenly these things have become priorities and they were not even on our radar before. But anyway, more is needed, including renovations of some of our spaces that just can't safely accommodate people in a way that we need them to. And another thing is that these, the most recent reports talking about the virus and it being airborne and so forth have caused us to take a look at our court ventilation systems. There are things that can be done, things that can be improved, but that becomes an expensive item. And we don't have funds for that work. And so that's one of the things we put on our list in terms of possible federal funding. Entry screening, it's an important component of our response. People come to the front door. I say now that the marshals are not just screening for weapons, but they're also screening for people who are ill. There are some people who have come and we've had to turn them away because they don't meet the criteria in terms of entry into the courthouse because of their exposure. But when that happens, they're given a phone number to call one of our people so that they can get information that they need to communicate with us about why they weren't able to come in. Is there something that needs to be rescheduled? Is there a need for an accommodation that they want to request or whatever? So it's not just telling people the doors are closed, but we work with them to see when they might be able to come or if they might be able to conduct their business without coming back into the courthouse. Many of you know that historically we've come forward and said that what we need is additional help for entry screening, additional marshals, and that's more the case now than ever because we don't have enough. When we have activity going on in our courtrooms and we need marshals in the courtroom, we don't have enough people to cover courtrooms and to do entry screening. And that's forced us to keep some courthouses closed at times we would otherwise like to be open. In terms of the backlog, we've been monitoring this backlog and developing plans, and that's what this phase plan does. Gives us a way to identify what our priorities are and identify what it is that we have to make up. Most recently, the Supreme Court released an order about the process for resumption of forcible entry and detainer cases or evictions. Representative Gatine mentioned those. We have those that have been pending for a while, since some of them since before the pandemic, because they haven't been able to be scheduled. During the first 3 phases of our process of getting back up to full speed, if you will, the plan essentially did not allow for those kinds of hearings. We've followed along with the governor's executive order in that regard. But the new order says that the restriction on those cases will be lifted once we get to phase 4, which is August 3rd. Those cases are going to be scheduled from the oldest to the newest. Plaintiffs are going to be required to file a form verifying that the property at issue is not a covered dwelling under the CARES Act or is otherwise subject to a prohibition against evictions. We have a process. The eviction cases will begin with an initial telephonic status conference, and then, if appropriate, the next step in the process would be mediation, and then ultimately having a hearing before the court. So to see if those things can be resolved in a less formal process earlier on. We also, I mentioned about the Violations Bureau, and we've come up with some good ideas in terms of a centralized approach to the Violations Bureau. Right now, we have 5,400 cases that are waiting to be heard. Those cases are important in a lot of ways, including the financial implications of that, if we can move those cases through. And because that's the one area where we have the e-filing system in place statewide, we can do some things centrally as far as moving those cases forward. So we feel pretty good about that. Not because the cases in and of themselves are the priority, but because we have the system in place and we can get at that backlog. So there's a number of needs that I've attempted to explain to you, and but the courthouses and the paper system that we have now is really not adequate to deal with the things that we're facing in this public health emergency. And we can't delay justice. We have to deal with these issues. We have to get to the backlog. We have a plan. We're moving forward as best we can. But as we began this fiscal year, we were already in a tight situation, and having to make these additional expenditures has just exacerbated that situation. So we provided you with a spreadsheet to show the expenditures that we have made or are making in the short term. And there are obvious things like protective equipment and additional cleaning, but there's also other kinds of equipment and software to handle these remote hearings and building modifications, and they all come at a cost. So we're making sacrifices. There are things we're just going to have to do without. But some of the major things that would help us, we would really benefit from having this additional federal funding. So with regard to the coronavirus relief fund request, we provided you with the submission that we made in May. And understanding in May, as this thing had been rolling out, we knew a lot, but we didn't know as much as we know today. So some of the things that were on that list, we've already just had to go forward and purchase. And other things have become evident since the time since the time that we made that submission. But in general terms, the scale of what we need, the amount of money that we think we need to address this, that has not changed. We think that's still there in the ballpark. If we don't receive that federal funding, then we're going to need to make some even further drastic changes as far as the budget. So that's really just my summary of where we are. As I said, I've given you the written testimony. We're happy to provide any other information. I've given you the 2 documents that indicate expenditures that we've made or are going to be made, and then also the information that we developed as far as the federal funding, if that becomes available. So with that, I will conclude and be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glessner. Appreciate the presentation. Scanning the room for questions. Representative Arata.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about telephonic conferences. It just seems like you're going to need a lot more help a lot more labor to get that done. How do you plan to give the summons to both parties? And if one party doesn't show up for the phone conference, then does the other party win by default, or do they still have to proceed to court? And also, is the mediation that's done over the phone binding? Just curious.
Well, so starting with the mediation, I'm getting the feedback there. Starting with the mediation, that's something that we're doing now, and I think with success, we're able to do some remote mediation where we have a mediator in one place and the parties in another place. And it's like any other mediation, people come together and you try to get to a solution, but a mediated response requires that kind of buy-in. So that's what you're trying to do in terms of mediation. Some of the issues that you raise in terms of how do you make service and how do you get these electronic signatures and some of these other kinds of things, they are things that we're still working on and developing. In some cases, that's relatively easy. It depends on the kind of case it might be. In other cases, not so much. But there's a whole level of detail behind that, and that's what we're in the process of working on right now.
I know with eviction hearings, a lot of times the tenants won't show up.
Right.
So if they don't show up for the telephonic conference, is that do they lose by default?
No, it's not automatic. People have their opportunity, and one might have a reason for saying why they couldn't come. By the way, in the last session, the legislature authorized us to do something with regard to people showing up by sending them reminder notices. Sometimes people forget and other kinds of things. So there's that kind of thing that can happen, and particularly in those kinds of, well, in all kinds of cases, you don't want people to be totally disadvantaged because they didn't show up. The question is, why didn't you show up? And so there has to be a follow-up as far as that's concerned. So it's not automatic.
Okay, so it sounds like you're still working.
Yeah, but that's the first step in the process. That telephonic piece, that's the very first piece. And then after that, if it's not resolved there, then it goes on to mediation. So there's a series of steps that they go through. So there's an opportunity to make sure that someone just isn't disadvantaged because they didn't know to show up. Or they couldn't show up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Representative Jorgensen.
Thanks very much, and glad to see you, Mr. Glessner. Thanks for being here. This is a good report. I'm interested in this whole idea of the automatic case management system and how that's going to be able to play into your ability to do things remotely. And I guess there's 2 questions I have. The first one really is, are these remote changes things that you anticipate maybe becoming permanent features of the court system that might allow you to do more remote work and thereby save some money and be more efficient? I was reading over the weekend about how in Singapore they've tried to use Zoom to deliver a death sentence, and I didn't think that was a very good use of this technology. But it does seem that there's a lot of other stuff you can be doing remotely that might last, and I think that's a really good idea. The other question I have is just, you talk about the federal funding, and I'm assuming you're referring just to the CARES funding that's been allocated to the state. There's not some other pot of federal money that you have access to, is there?
There was one small item that we're part of. It's actually directed to law enforcement, and we were presented with that information because of our marshals, and I think a big focus on that was for overtime. It seemed pretty targeted, so we're eligible for a piece of that, so we'll certainly apply for that. If there are other opportunities, we'll apply for those as well, but we are talking mostly about the CARES Act. And to go back to your first question, so with regard to dealing with things remotely, there are a lot of things about it that are great, and we would like to get the best of that, and we would want to retain it. So the investment that gets made into this, I think, is a long-term investment. On the other side, there are some downsides to it. One of the reasons we wanted to go to Zoom is we think that it's a better platform than the one that we have been using. We think it'll be more efficient. So right now, those cases candidly are slower. I don't know how many times a day a judge might have to say, "Excuse me, Mr. Glessner, but you're muted." They're just, we're getting people, where they need to be, sort of hurting people. There are those kinds of issues. So some cases will benefit from that technology, and others less so.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Glessner? I don't see any. I really appreciate, we've had a number of these roundtable conversations, over the past few weeks with different areas. We're really glad we're able to have you join us today, Mr. Glessner. It is, keeping our judiciary department running and adapting, both in the short term and long term, is incredibly important. So really appreciate the engagement and all the information.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, Representative.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our last item today on our agenda is we're going to hear from Director Nolan on information about the fiscal year close. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So I realize I'm during lunch, so I'll try to keep it quick and can answer any questions or give you any backup material that you need. The two documents that we included for you are the Controller's fiscal year 20 year-end memo to the Governor and Commissioner Figueroa. And I'll go over that. And then the revenue numbers, preliminary revenue numbers for June. I will go over that as well. And as we touch on anything else, we can certainly go into that. Do everybody have the Controller's report, first of all? Yes. So there are many documents that we've looked at over the years for the end of year balance. This one seems to lay it out the best. So we try to get this and share it with you and summarize it. So the fiscal year closed at the end of June, and it takes a couple of weeks, 3 weeks usually, to wrap up and close the books. So that was done starting the weekend of the 18th. So as we close the books, we find we have a revenue shortfall from the March forecast of 28.7 million. Now that is significantly less than some of the numbers that we had been talking about over the last couple of months. And I'll go into that as probably most of my discussion after I go through this particular report. So if I if you have questions on that amount, we'll do that as soon as I get through this report, if that's okay. So the other component, so we start with, what the revenue ended up compared to the March forecast. And then we look at the various balances and accounts that don't carry and other accounting adjustments. So which while the revenue shortfall was negative, so it reduced the budgeted balance. The other items, the lapse in general fund accounts, unbudgeted balances that didn't carry, it was a positive 13.4. The lapse of prior year encumbrances was 7.6 million positive. And then there are other prior year period adjustments and accounting adjustments of 1.7. That was also positive. And then there was one transfer, the so-called fixed statutory transfers, fixed dollar transfers under the sometimes referred to as the cascade of 2.5 million that went to the general fund operating capital. So, which resulted in a negative overall of 8.5. So in previous years and recent years, what you had seen when you went through this, you saw some positive revenue variance and then these other positive spending side account balance transactions that would result in a balance that would then go through the cascade, which is depending on whether you include the fixed dollar transfers, statutory transfers, and then getting to the 80-20 budget stabilization split. So because we did not have a sufficient balance, we had a negative balance, we did not have a cascade, however, or distribution. However, the transfer to general fund operating capital, the language does not limit it to only available balances. It requires that transfer be made. So the net effect is, you may recall we had a budgeted balance of 192.6 when you left. So the 8.5 reduces that budgeted balance to 184.1. But there's a lot of discussion that we're about to have on the revenue shortfall piece and the accruals that were made to reflect the delay in the tax payment to July 15th from April 15th that have an impact on that. But that technically is how it closed. The second page of this sheet points out that the budget stabilization fund stands at 258.7. The reserve for general fund operating capital stands at 13.9. And then the reserve for property tax relief stands at 375,000. The reserve for general fund operating capital, as you recall, you gave the administration the authority to transfer 11 million of that for COVID expenses, and they have not transferred anything yet. So that 2.5 that was just added as part of the closing brings that total up to 13.9. The budget stabilization fund, the last version of it that we looked at, we didn't have the last piece of interest. So that is pretty consistent with what we've been tracking, except for the last June interest payment. And then reserve for property tax relief, we just made I think it was estimated at $31 million transfer to pay those $100 property tax relief bills for each homestead. So that balance is now down to 375,000. I could go on all that. I mean, if you have any questions on that, just touch briefly on the highway fund. The highway fund had a negative revenue, closing revenue of 18 million, and that took it from a positive balance of just over 7 million down to a negative balance of 8.5 million in fiscal year 20 and roughly 9.3 million in fiscal year 21. So the highway fund is in a negative position, and I can talk more about that. But first, let me want to go through and talk about the general fund and the closing revenues for the general fund. But if you have any questions on the controller's report, I know that was pretty quick.
Any questions? Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief question. Since we don't have the money to transfer to the contingent account, the loan insurance, and the retiree health insurance, can you just give us a heads up on the status of the governor's contingent account? I'm assuming that some has been drawn for FY21. Can you give us an idea how much remains for 21?
I do not know that off the top of my head, but we'll get you that information. I don't know if we've looked at that recently. I don't know if Maureen has indicated whether we have or not, but we'll get you that.
I can say that the balance is currently $275,910.
Good.
Just a quick follow-up while Kirsten is online with us. The other two that would normally get some funds, the loan insurance fund at FAME and the retiree health insurance, UAL, could you quantify how healthy they are at this point in time, or is there any concern, given our negative end of the year balance, that they're not getting any infusions?
I can get you that information, but I don't have that off the top of my head like I did this one.
All set. So Chris, why don't you go through the next part, and then we'll save any questions for when.
Sure. We do have a history of the distributions from the balance each year, and the last time that we did not make those payments to other accounts was 2015. So for the last 4 payments, those other entities had gotten distributions. So that I did have handy. So the revenue table sheet, this document shows the balance of revenue as a negative of rounding 28.8 million. The biggest apparent negative on here is sales tax being down 61.8 million, or 3.8%. The other area that I was going to focus on is the individual income tax line, and that shows a positive of 25.7 million. We have, I think you've had discussions at various meetings about the income tax accrued, both in April and also in June. Just to refresh your memory, we had an accrual in April for individual income tax final payments for calendar year 19, estimated payments, corporate final payments, and corporate estimated payments that altogether totaled 264.5 million. That was in April. And in June, we had estimated payments that were due in June that were not paid in June. They were not due until July. And that was a total of individual income tax estimated payments of 33.4 million, and corporate of 23 million for a total of 56.4 million. And that is a total of the 264.5 and the 56.4 of 320 million in accruals that were before the delay to July 15th were budgeted to have been paid in fiscal year 20, but will now be paid in fiscal year 21. So as we prepare for the revenue forecast on Wednesday, we keep track of the amount that we budgeted to be paid from those sources, and then the amount that is actually will be paid from those sources. And some of those, the final individual and corporate had some additional payments in fiscal year 20 that were net against the accruals, but the bulk of it will be paid, has been paid throughout July 15th, and subsequent to July 15th, there's some piece that's paid. Even Friday, there was an additional payment of final payments from previous year and estimated payments. So what happens is that as those payments come in, and the accrual is reversed, there's some negative impact on 21 because the actual collections are not equal to the budgeted amount from the previous year. And that is what we're monitoring and figuring out. And when we get to Wednesday, we'll incorporate whatever that impact is into the revenue forecast for 21, and that impact is 21, and then we'll update 22 and 23. So while the negative variance, it's hard to do this really quickly, but while the negative variance was 28.8 million closing fiscal year 20, the reversal, et cetera, will still result in a roughly $100 million negative hit to 21 that will be incorporated as part of the estimate for 21 moving forward. So while we had talked a couple of months ago, I think the administration, in doing the first estimates from the stress test, had believed that the shortfall for 20 would be 200,000. And then in discussions as part of the CEFC report at the end of June, beginning of July, the estimate was more like 130 million. The real, even though the part that actually hit so far in 20 is only 28 million, there's still an additional hit that we're going to take when we reverse the accruals, so that the actual collections for those sources are less than what we had budgeted for those sources. So altogether, then, the negative hit that we currently are estimating, it's changing as we collect more from those individual and corporate payment sources, is around 100 million cumulative. So it's not just 28.8, it's more like 100 million hit to 21. And then, of course, the rest of the adjustment, that's just from the reversal of the accruals and also the shortfall from the sales tax and that went into that 28.8 number. So whatever the number is that was previously estimated for 21 at 525 could potentially be 100 million higher. So while we didn't take the hit in 20 and we carried more balance from 20 into 21, we still face having to pay part of that as part of the reversal of those accruals. So whatever the number is that we come up with the estimate for 21 will also include the impact of the reversal of those accruals. And it's overall, that impact is expected to be about 100 million, but it changes every day as we get closer to Wednesday and do that snapshot Wednesday to do that forecast and produce that as well moving forward. And we'll be making that forecast on Wednesday. It'll be the best estimates that we have available. There are some factors that certainly, I think I've heard a number of you talk about hoping or expecting the feds to have taken final action on whatever additional stimulus payments they were going to do, and that hasn't happened and probably won't happen as of Wednesday. And the economic forecast had made some assumptions about the feds taking some action to continue some of those payments. They did not specify what kind or the amount or the timing. So we'll have to make some assumption about that moving forward, because that has been very helpful. The other big factor as we move from 200 down to this smaller, roughly 100 number, was withholding, keeping up with budget. And a lot of that had to do with those additional payments that people were getting that and weren't adjusting their withholding. So that has been helpful to our bottom line in 20. And we'll have to make an assumption moving forward for 21 as to how that will continue, how, what, and when. So that I can go over that in more detail if you'd like, or maybe I'll stop for questions now.
Let me stop and see if anybody's got any questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to kind of cram that into a tight space, but
no, that's all right. It's very much appreciated. So Chris, I'm trying to distill again all that detailed information. So, and I know we're less than 48 hours away from getting the revenue forecast. So I'm certainly not going to ask you to speculate, and I'm not going to speculate. But it sounds like if we're looking at, I mean, obviously the number here, the revenue shortfall of 28.7 million in 20 is a much lower amount of shortfall than we had been talking about over the last few months, when we were utilizing the stress test. But what I think you heard, what I heard you say is, because of the way the accrual works, a lot of that, I'm not going to call it good news, I'm going to call it less bad news. A lot of that less bad news is going to be, or a chunk of it at least, is, ultimately possibly going to be reversed, taking into account the accrual when the Revenue Forecasting Committee meets on Wednesday. Is that a layman's summary if I'm trying to distill this and
yes, I mean, it's,
talk to people about it?
In addition to everything else unusual that we're all going through, it is unusual that we'd be doing a number of different things at the same time. Having these significant accruals, we have other accruals anyway, but not to this magnitude. So having accruals is not that unusual, but trying to close the books within day and incorporating that within days of doing the new revenue forecast. I mean, when we normally have we wouldn't be doing this particular, we are going to be doing a forecast on December 1st. So in a few short months, we're going to be relooking at all of this again. But yes, I mean, that's the effect of it, is that what looks like close the books and look at the cash and say, hey, we're only, with the positives from that, we're only 8.5 down when we thought we were going to be originally 200 down. It is better than the 200, it's better than the 130, but it's not 8.5 or 28. It's still thinking it's more like 100. And so while the books will have closed for 20, there'll still be that additional hit we take on top of whatever other hit we take from updating the revenue forecast for 21. So we will lay that out, break that out, and hopefully it'll be clear when we do this, when we meet Wednesday, and then try to get the report out by the end of the week.
So if you were doing for us that spreadsheet that you normally give the committee, right? You know, the one that we go over when there's a new revenue forecast or when we end a legislative session, you know, if you were going to give that to us today, it would only show a small reduction in unappropriated surplus based on the one you provided us the last time, right? But
right, the 192
points prepare at the, you know, after Wednesday's revenue forecast will certainly be much changed even from that.
Right. So I mean, the impact of the 8.5 took that 192.6 number that we had in the last status that you saw and took it down to 184.1, and then that carried forward into 21 and still left a balance of 105.4 in 21, but we will be adding a very large negative to that in 21 that will drive that obviously to a very large negative number. So it's just updating that status document and distributing it just has a shelf life of 2 days because it'll all be blown away by the revenue forecast. It is, if we were looking at how to do that with, footnotes, et cetera, and it just was too confusing.
No, totally
so
get it.
we decided not to distribute that right now. So
You've got us so oriented towards that document, though. I envision it every time I imagine us having one of those conversations.
yeah. So the impact from closing in 20 is relatively small. It's 8.5 million.
Yep.
So that document does not change dramatically. But what is going to happen later this week will have a very significant impact on 21. So
super. Any other, Representative Millett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the information we had 2 months ago back in May, and then the updates from the Consensus Economic Forecasting Committee, and your comment about 525 million was the May number estimated for FY21 and 200 for FY20. Given what you saw in the Economic Forecasting Committee percentage changes, which weren't known back in May, do you anticipate the 525 to grow or shrink? And are you, as a professional, Chris, equally concerned about the 22-23, given the economic forecasting downturns? I'm not asking for some projections, but magnitude-wise and concern level-wise, how do you view the likelihood of a change in the 525 figure for 21, and how much concern do you have at the moment for the 22-23 economy, given the June numbers from economic forecasting?
So the 525 was, as you all know, the number that was produced by administration using the 2018 stress test. And so what we're saying is that number is still, I think, there and best estimate of until we know where we're going to be Wednesday. And then you have this additional 100 that could potentially lay on top of that, but you also still have a balance of 105 carried forward into 21. So it still is likely to be around 525. I mean, I think it could be, higher or lower than that. But I don't think we have a specific number that is better than that. So, I mean, we have been answering some survey questions from NCSL about getting updates of what our numbers were, and we did not want to create a third set of numbers. So we went with that same set of numbers. And I think the administration may have done that in a letter that they sent that I think you got today that pegged the number at 725, which would be 525 plus 200. So it may not be that high, but moving forward, it is really what everybody is trying to figure out is, the shape of the recovery, the timing of the recovery, when that all happens. And so the economic forecast assumes some recovery moving forward, and that would be a positive to our revenue position. So getting through this year, 21, and then some recovery moving forward would start to build back. But whether we get back to the levels that we were prior to this is just a matter of a number of years. So, so we have the economic forecast, we have the experience through this year. We have, assumptions about federal activity, additional stimulus that we have to make that would drive the forecast. And then, as I said, not to cop out, but we'll be back at this in November to update the economic forecast November 1st and the revenue forecast December 1st. So.
Would it be okay for me just to add one sentence to that?
I'm going to give you a second, Commissioner. I want to get through the questions for Mr. Nolan, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to comment. So if you could just hold on. Rosemary, did you have something else? I'm going to really, so again, just so folks know, so we're going to get the new revenue forecast on Wednesday. That'll give us a much more real and actionable status of where we are. It is the intent of my co-chair and I to, as we normally do, bring the committee together shortly thereafter and discuss the revenue forecast and the economic forecast. So again, I'm going to let people ask whatever questions they want, but I'm not really going to do a lot of speculating between now and Wednesday about what the situation is, since we're within 48 hours of getting that information. But that being said, Representative.
That was my question, Mr. Chair, is the ability of the committee to be fully briefed after the Wednesday decisions and an opportunity to convene at some point to review and react to it.
Absolutely.
I assume from comments that I had with a conversation with Chris before, it's all going to be online remotely on Wednesday. So I'm assuming you and OFPR will share with the committee the results by email soon thereafter.
Yes, I mean, so we'll do what we did for the CEFC, is that we will include the link. We'll email you the link to the Microsoft Teams meeting. We will post all the information on the RFC's webpage. The preliminary information that we have going into the meeting, we'll post that, and that link will be there as well. And in addition, the audio will stream through the Taxation Committee. We don't warrant using the Appropriation Committee room anymore, so we had to move to the Taxation Committee room. So, so the audio will stream. If you go onto the calendar, the audio will stream through the Taxation Committee, and then we'll email you the link, and then the link will still be on the legislature's webpage to be able to find that as well. So, and then when we're done, we'll probably put out some really quick summary, as we usually do, within 24 hours, and then work on the bulk of the report and hopefully get it out by the end of the week.
Any other questions for Mr. Nolan? Well, thank you, Chris, for taking this, some of this very complicated information and distilling it down for me and the rest of the committee. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Commissioner
Figueroa, sorry, you had said you wanted to comment, and I want to just sort of invite you to comment generally on where we close up the fiscal year.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the way that Chris just laid that out. It's, to his point, somewhat complicated. We don't normally move $300 million worth of anticipated revenues 90 days out across the fiscal year, which is kind of why in that where he said we were talking about the 725 now, at this point, since fiscal year has ended, we just have added the 200 to the 525 as a total biennial issue. And then the way that we've been thinking about it and talking about it is what Chris said, the 28.7 plus what we think we know about so far as of the processing of as of last Friday. That 200 million estimate that we thought for 20 is really more like 100. And so basically, if you start thinking about a biennial issue of 725, now you're at a biennial issue of 625. The one thing, I mean, that revenue forecasting is going to be quite interesting. Chris mentioned the individual withholding because of the unemployment programs and the stimulus checks. The fact that individual withholding was over budget is a complicating factor. But one of the things that I did want to say, and that we think bodes well for, you know, how we've opened and some of our sales tax information, is that as part of our $200 million estimate, we had actually anticipated a 25% reduction in sales tax in the fourth quarter. And it was 13%. Still not great, right? But not 25%. And so again, it's going to be a very long and complicated conversation on Wednesday as we kind of decipher some of the information and hope that the federal government does move a little quicker would be helpful. But so thank you, Chris. That was a really good summary. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or thoughts before we adjourn for the day? Representative Miller. You got to put your mic on. So.
There was a single page item, Kirsten, in our folder from Frank Wiltuck at the Controller's Office. And we haven't talked about it, and I was having a little trouble understanding what it really meant. Are you familiar with that one, or could we get a follow-up explanation maybe from Maureen about it? It's just, it establishes what I guess we would call interim report on costs incurred during the coronavirus fund relief fund proceeds.
Okay, yep. That was a report that was due, I think, July 17th. I'm sorry, I don't have the piece of paper right in front of me. Reporting on the corona relief virus status. That number should be very close. I'm just going to click in before I say this out loud. Yep, that number should be very close to the actual expended or encumbered figure that we have on our CRF spreadsheet that we talked about earlier. And that spreadsheet shows 321 million now, but that was through July 22nd. And I believe Frank's number was like 299. So I think that that was an interim report due, and the plan now is that we go forward, I believe, quarterly. So I think the next report might be due, I'm going to say October 1st, but I'll correct that if I'm wrong. I believe that now we go to like normal end of quarters.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Again, we are going to have Maureen poll the committee about a possible meeting next Monday. Probably a number of agenda items, but I think first and foremost will be the reception of the revenue forecast and the opportunity for us to ask questions about that. I know we're all very anxious, to get that information and figure out our path forward from there. So that being said, unless I see any other hands, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance today.
Thank you.